Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Fueled by Progress, hosted by me, Mark Joseph Szymanski. We have in the studio with us today, Alex Connor. How you doing, man?
Pretty good. Actually amazing.
There you go.
I've had a good couple months here, so
Nice.
you know what?
Nice.
This is the cherry on top.
nice, dude. Thank you so much for stopping by. It's great to meet you in person, finally.
Yeah, we've had a couple phone calls and the vibe. I feel like everyone in life, you find a few people that you call, you vibe with, and you really understand them, and you empathize with where they're coming from. And I feel like we kind of have that. So I've been really excited to talk to you on the podcast and hang out. And I hope that our energy kind of transfers to the people listening.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I feel the same way. For the people at home, just to give them some context, we met via Jimmy and Nick Desani and Jimmy Farbo that were on the podcast a few episodes ago, I think. And yeah, I mean, I know that you guys go way back with each other and everything like that from PSU days, and you're doing some incredible stuff, man. So the couple conversations that we've had on the phone, like you said, just vibing and just very excited to talk about all that, and then even more so than just your professional stuff that you have going on, just like even as we were talking about before we went live, your journey and just all sorts of different stuff. Do you want to give the people a little bit of context, like to how you've gotten here? So like maybe just like throughout college and stuff like that, and how you found this passion of, like basically science and all sorts of things that are going on right now, just biology and all that.
Sure. So to give everyone a little bit of context, I'm currently doing my Ph.D. in chemical and biological engineering at Rensselaer Polytechnic. It's a engineering-focused school in upstate New York. And I kind of arrived here on a simultaneously stereotypical but unique path, if that makes sense. So, a lot of people that get into engineering, I share a lot in common with them. I was good at math. I was good at science. I liked them. I liked problem solving. I liked doing difficult things in terms of complicated problems. And that kind of pushed me towards the path of engineering. And, another aspect that I'm sure a lot of fellow engineering majors and professionals out there can empathize with is the fact that I was also very interested in going towards a career path that had some promise to it, some security. I wanted to do something that I knew would not necessarily be kind of a useless degree, not to offend anyone.
No, for sure.
But, through college was a very, very interesting, informative experience for me. I think almost more so than the average person. College for everyone is very, it's a very informative time. You learn a lot about yourself, a lot about who you are, what you should do. And I think that for me, that was even a little bit extra. And I learned that I really wasn't all about the standard engineering path. I wanted to do a little bit more. I wanted to do something a little bit different. And that's what ultimately led me to do the PhD. And now here I am. I'm about halfway through, about 2.5, 3 years into the PhD in chemical engineering, biological engineering. Couldn't be happier. One of the best decisions I made in my life was to go to graduate school for engineering. And so that's where I'm at. My research focuses on actually a pretty clear-cut combination of chemical and biological engineering. I work kind of in the material science side with silk proteins, and just the general behavior of what we call beta sheet self-aggregating proteins. So that's kind of the chemical side, right? And then there's a lot of bio. I work with bacteria, I work with DNA, genetic engineering, and stuff like that. So I'm really loving where I'm at right now, this combination, multiple fields included. And yeah, that kind of gives the background for some people listening right now.
Definitely. I remember, hearing that again, because we've talked on the phone, we kind of talked about this a little bit. I think back to, my first thoughts and even my thoughts now, and I try to put myself in the position of somebody that hears that type of a thing for the first time, right? It's not every day that you sit down and you chat with, somebody that plays with actual, proteins and stuff like that, right? And, I think that one of the things that I would always ask, and the question that I still kind of continue to kind of put it together when I think of a picture like that, like your everyday type of, thing. So maybe I think that might be valuable, is what is your day-to-day kind of like? So that was the context around what you do. But if you had to describe like a typical Tuesday or something like that, what does it look like as far as you getting up, going into the lab and kind of doing everything?
So that's a great question. That's a great question. So it's honestly quite different than the average graduate student. A lot of people in academia, especially a lot of grad students, they tend to be night people.
Yeah.
They tend, there's a funny thing about academia. It attracts a certain type of person, right? What professors, grad students, generally everybody that I work with, I'm in contact with, they're high in a personality trait called openness. Right. So openness, and this goes back to kind of the big 5 personalities. It's in my opinion, a really great analysis of personalities. And they're usually very high in openness, which means that new ideas, new concepts, things they've never heard about before, they're really interested in. Right. And that's kind of who I'm surrounded with. And so what you get in that type of an environment is people that are all over the spectrum. I mean, people that are like myself, or people that are, more, they sleep until 12, they work all night. Like, it's all over the board. It's just people that are interested in ideas. And where I sit in that is kind of at the end of it, one end of things, which is like hardcore morning person. Yeah. Hardcore conscientiousness in terms of like working and structure. And so a typical Tuesday for me is, wake up at 5:30, 5:45. I'll, have a little bit of caffeine. I'll drink some water, have my creatine. And then by 6:30, I'm at the gym. And that is my time. My main hobby in life is lifting weights. And I'm very much into a combination of overall building my health through exercise and building muscle. But as a 25-year-old guy, I'm also interested in kind of physique building. I like the goal of building the best natural physique that I can for myself. And that goal kind of translates into all aspects of my life, where whether I'm at work, at the gym, my relationships, my family, whatever it is that I'm doing, I kind of view my life through this window of like, how can I make this the best version of myself? And that's really what the morning gym workout is for me. I typically have like a 4-day routine. I do like 2 upper body days, 2 lower body days. And for me, that time is about health and just working towards a natural perfection, working towards being the best version of me that I can. So on this typical Tuesday, I hit the gym, and then I usually try to get to work by 7:30, 8 in the morning. And then that's the fun time, man. That's the most underrated part of doing a Ph.D. in biological chemical engineering, is that I love the lab. Yeah. I can't deny it, man. I show up, I check my cell cultures, I start doing plasmid extractions, and that's where the science happens. And that's really, I love the gym, my best hobby, but where I feel like my importance is in this whole thing we call humanity civilization is within the sciences. And I view that time is not only something I enjoy, but something that is my responsibility. I mean, I need to work towards working on projects that actually make the world a better place, that have potential within markets, that move us forward as a civilization. And I take a lot of meaning in that. And it's fun for me. So I'll do some experiments till about 10 or 11. Then I usually take a lunch break. I like to listen to The Hill while I eat some, I usually have some roast beef, a couple glasses of milk, something like that. Clearly not vegan. And after that, back to the lab. I'll send some emails. I'll have a couple meetings, whether it's for MegaSilk or research meetings, whatever it is. And, about 4 or 5, I usually call it a day. Typical Tuesday, I'll head back usually to Janice's house, who is my very close girlfriend. We've been dating for several years now. It's a very serious relationship. Nice. So I'll head back to her house, and I'll make us some food and maybe I'll get in an hour of Civilization 5 or online poker, and then you know what? She gets back. We typically will eat some steaks for dinner and you know, watch a movie and go to bed. I'm very blessed. It is a very typical Tuesday for me. I am so grateful for it because it's very good. I get to work out, do what I like, see, you know, basically she's my family in Albany. I get to see her, and it's yeah, gosh, man, you're making me all sappy. What are we, 10 minutes into this?
Well, I mean, you definitely, man. I mean, it sounds great. It sounds like I'm very happy for you. I always like when I, you know, have conversations either on the show or just in general with people that are doing things that they love, right? And it doesn't matter if it's a professional thing. It doesn't matter if it's graduate school. It doesn't matter if it's entrepreneurial. You know, even if you love a 9 to 5, fantastic, right? But that's there's so many points in there, and we're gonna run through all of them because every single one of them has their own, you know, purpose. And I love these pillars of life that you're kind of building in here, like these staples of certain aspects that, you know, you're making sure that you know, stay healthy. You're making sure that you're doing things that you love. You're making sure that, you know, you make time for loved ones and all that sort of stuff. That was a really, really, we'll say full, you know, typical Tuesday, like very wholesome, right? So I don't know where we can begin. I mean, there's so much, I think.
Well, it's funny you mentioned the word pillars.
Yeah.
It's funny you say that because in so many ways, that is how I view my life.
Yeah.
I have a couple pillars. I have my career, what I'm doing for human civilization, what I am trying to do for the world. Like, that's my career.
Yeah.
And then I have my health.
Right.
That's the gym. That's my razor sharp focus on my nutrition. And then I have my relationships, my friends, my family. Like, I kind of have these pillars. And every day I want to work a little bit on each one if I can.
Right.
And it's just funny for you to use that word because it really defines a lot of the ways that I see my life, a lot of the ways that I feel like you see your life.
Absolutely.
And a lot of the ways that I feel like most guys and girls should.
Yeah.
You know, in a way, it kind of narrows things down, simplifies this crazy, chaotic experience of being a conscious thing.
Yeah.
We got to narrow it down to a couple things and just go for it.
For
you
sure,
know,
for sure.
it's too chaotic out there not to try to do that.
Yeah, I think that's again, it's weird. It's weird that you picked up on me saying the pillar thing because I have written in my notes somewhere where it is, I can't remember the specific order, so I'm gonna mess this up and we can like maybe rearrange them. But it is like career, so like professionally, like you said, career, like relationships, right? So the friendships, I kind of lump all those into one. There was two that you didn't say that I'm sure are probably still in there for you, and it's wealth and spirituality. So there's like 5 total. Which one was I missing? I can't remember.
So that's interesting. So I definitely care about wealth.
Right.
And kind of the irony, or maybe that's not the right word, but the reason I care about wealth is more through the window of as an adult, as a, you know, I'm 25 now, as a 35, 45, 55-year-old man, I want to have wealth to the point where I can optimally make my family happy.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, to the point where I can, you know, if I ever make a lot of money, have my parents be close to me, have Janice's parents be close to me, just have the connection of the family, have the resources we need, right? So, but the spirituality one is interesting to me. And I think this is something that from an intellectual perspective, I'm very interested in, is spirituality in general, because I don't necessarily consider myself a spiritual person. You know, I don't really identify with any major religions.
Right.
And that's not to talk negatively about anyone that does. You know, there is certainly value to be found in certain religions. I think that, you know, Jordan Peterson has brought up some very, very interesting analysis of especially Christianity and the value that brings to even a modern human, a modern society, in terms of just fundamental human experiences, right? But at the same time, I don't really identify with any major religions. I'm quite a secular person. And so spirituality to me is something that I don't consider myself to have a lot of. but at the same time is something that I think I should learn more about. And it's kind of going back to the openness thing I said about graduate students, professors, academia, people in general. I think I'm in a very high percentage of percentile, of openness in terms that of I just like to hear new ideas, new ways of life, new things. And I think spirituality is one point where like I want to hear like what's out there, what people think of it, how people interpret it, because it's not something I know a lot about. It's not something I necessarily identify with. So tell me more, you know?
Yeah. I'm definitely, so a little bit of context for my side of things is I was raised Catholic. I went to Catholic school from the time I was like in pre-K to the time I graduated high school. So I went to private school, and that was it. Like, I mean, you had religion class every day. Does that mean that you were religious? Does that mean that you went to church every Sunday? Absolutely not, because I didn't. But at the same time, I've talked about this here. We've talked about this on with Amanda on AM and the PM. We talk about religion a decent amount, not because we're religious, but because the concept, like you said, spirituality, religion is it's an interesting one. It makes you think, and then sometimes you think about it too much, and it's like very strange. So I think that's why in a lot of cases there is a ton of things to learn from this religion, that religion, A, B, C, D, however long you want to go down the list. But at the same time, I think that sometimes it's almost just like a way to live your life that provides some structure, right? It provides morals, it provides values. And I think that was huge for me personally throughout the my time in Catholicism, right? To practicing it to whatever extent I did. But at the same time though, I think I'm only 24, so I don't have all the answers either. And I haven't like dove headfirst into spirituality, but from listening to people like Jordan Peterson, a little bit of Sam Harris, those types of minds, it's like it provided a really good foundation, but I'm not so sure that it's necessary long term, if that makes sense, right? Because what I feel it really does for you, it provides you a sense of almost comfort in knowing that somebody, and almost like comfort and accountability, knowing that somebody or some higher power or this book defines you and the things that you should do and shouldn't you do, right? But at the same time, I think that there's probably a lot that we can learn from Catholicism, but there's probably some shitty parts. And then there's a lot we could learn from probably even like any other thing. Like, I mean, that was just where I'm from, but like Judaism or, whatever it is. I don't know a ton of religions, but you get the idea. You could learn a lot, but there's definitely shitty parts associated with each one. I use Catholicism because I guess I can critique that because I was Catholic, right? I guess still am. But the point being that as you grow, or at least as I've grown, and I've tried, and much like yourself, we've tried to expand in openness and like understand different ideas and stuff like that. Once you get to that point, you start to build your own book almost, right? I feel like I literally am building in like Google Docs, as silly as it sounds, a way to live life that is for me mostly, but other people could learn from it as well. Like the pillars thing is a great example. Like, break the Bible down, for instance. I don't want to go like super crazy in religion. We don't have to like be like theologians here. But what
one place I thought this podcast wasn't going to go.
No, but like staying on the intellectual side of it, I really think that if you just taught a kid those pillars and like go deeper into it, like how to be a good person, how to stay healthy, how to treat people with respect. That's all religion really is. And then with a bunch of other like weird little things like go, pray at this time, do this at this time, all that sort of stuff. I'm not shitting on it because I think it's good for a lot of people. But when I say spirituality, and that's one of the pillars, I think that it's important to remember spirituality is almost like your connection to like the universe, or just the connection to everyone else in a sense of different than relationships. It's like you're just here, and you have to be as good as you can. And just don't hurt anybody, really. Right. Is really what it boils down to, honestly. And it all comes together, and we can talk about all of them, but that's kind of the big thing for me is I'm not super religious, just like yourself, and I would love to learn more, and I always continue to try to do it, but I am past the point of thinking that I need to belong to some sort of like, group of religious, body to be a good person.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
And I think in a way I can condense it a bit in that.
Please.
I'm
a rambler.
Yeah. No, I was enjoying it. But in a way, we live in this very Western secular society, right? And I think a lot of where you and I are coming from is kind of this place of feeling like, well, I'm not the type of person that's just gonna go to church or go to a temple or whatever your religion is. I'm not really the type of person that's gonna go there and just believe everything they say, listen to everything they say. I'm a little bit more disagreeable than that, right?
Mhm.
I'm a little bit more kind of the type of person, the type of guy or girl that wants to do my own thing,
Right.
think about life my own way,
Definitely.
right?
Yep.
And I think for a person like that in secular society, in Western society, you're in an interesting position because you are kind of on your own. And I think you mentioned Sam Harris. I love Sam Harris. He's got great podcasts, great thinker, right? He has one of my favorite quotes about religion and the West. And he says that in the West, roughly speaking, this is a rough quote.
Right.
He says, in the West, we have developed a miraculous system for systematic analysis of the material world. We have developed a system in the West that can put a man on the moon, that can generate a vaccine in less than a year. This amazing scientific secular system. But in the East, we're thinking more traditional, Chinese, Indian, or more of the Eastern religions and cultures, right? They have spent thousands of years working on the manual for the mind.
Yeah.
So where we have worked on the manual for the material world, the East has focused more throughout their history. I'm not talking recently. I'm talking more within the past 4,000 or 5,000 years. They have worked more on the manual for mind. You see Buddhism coming out of the East. You see the practice of meditation coming out of the East. A lot of things that really speak to the nature of the human mind, the nature of being consciousness, and how to wrangle that in and make it your friend instead of making it your enemy. And we don't have any of that in the West.
Right.
I mean with the Enlightenment and the focus on science, and simultaneously with the focus on Christianity, we don't have much of that. And I think this leaves modern Westerners in a very interesting position where a lot of them embrace the scientific, rational, secular culture, which is great because on one hand that gets us to the moon. We make a vaccine in record amount of time. We develop the internet, the iPhone. It's awesome. But on the other hand, look at what's happening to Westerners. Look at our rates of anxiety, of depression, of all of these things that are more attuned to having a manual for the mind, are more attuned to meditation, some of the aspects of Buddhism, things like that. And I think it's such a fascinating dichotomy, such a fascinating aspect of humanity, that there's these multiple avenues to what we consider progress. And I don't think as Westerners we should ignore these things that people like Sam Harris bring to light with the power of understanding the mind. And I'm a geek, so I could even revert this back to neurotransmitters, and that the East has done a great job of focusing on the serotonin, cannabinoid, oxytocin type pathways, while the West has focused on the dopaminergic pathways. And you need both.
Yeah.
You definitely need both.
Yeah.
But as a geek, as somebody that loves biology, I always kind of take it back to science and the pure fascination I feel when I realize that Sam Harris's quote, this rant that I've been going on, is really actually supported in the science of neurotransmitters and what's going on at the level of our cerebral cortex.
Yeah. I think so one thing that I've learned throughout my journey, and we'll just call it the last 2 years because that's where I've learned an absolute shit ton of stuff, is I think one of the easiest ways to get in trouble in anything in life, it goes for anything, but the easiest way to get yourself into trouble is to thinking that you or what you're doing or anything you're a part of is completely right, in a sense, for 99% of the time, right? All things in moderation. That's a quote that a lot of people use. It's come to be very well known by me, and I think a lot of other people. As you continue to go through life, you see that, and I think you make extremely well articulated points in that the West has focused on material, types of things, like you said, going to the moon, all that sort of stuff. the East has really focused on, kind of conquering the mind in a sense, and, focusing on meditation and I mean, obviously a lot more than that, right? And I mean, that's something that I've noticed, and I haven't thought about it in the way that you just described it, but I definitely realized that. And I think that it kind of goes back again to the pillars and the fact where, you can't just, the point of the pillars thing too is, the cool part about that is, like, let's say you have 5 pillars, right? You have the health, wealth, spirituality, relationships, and then I always forget one. The other one, whatever it is. But like, you always have like 4 or 5, right?
Family.
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 Yeah. I mean,
Maybe.
yeah, we could write them down. We could figure them out. But the point being is, whatever you have, they should be equally distributed in a sense, right? So you're not like, like when I put wealth in there, some people might say, oh, you just care about money. Well, no, I care about everything equally, because everything is like equally important. You need to make sure that you have money, and you build a good lifestyle so that you have the options to take care of your family. And it's not even about like wealth just for yourself. I mean that, for instance, I'll give you a quote, again, rough quote from like Dave Ramsey. He says, live like nobody else will today so you can give like nobody else will later down the line. Meaning that, he's like famous for saying, eat rice and beans like now, and just like make sure you save your money and stuff. So when, you stock market, yada, yada, we can go into finance if you want, but basically, the amount of money that you save and you invest in everything now grows exponentially over time. And then when you're in your 40s, 50s, 60s, you have the ability to share that with other people, right? And get other people started, whether it's your kids, your grandkids, other people, just in general, that you can be generous. You can donate to charities and stuff like that. That's where it all comes full circle for me, right? So I'm going all over the place here, but I think, more than anything, it's something that I would like to do too. If you think about spirituality in that way, I don't do a lot of meditation right now. I don't do a lot of like connecting my body back to my mind in a sense, and to the universe. I think about it more from the religious side of things, but I think it's a progression. I think you have to realize, hey, this is how I'm starting to try to live my life. This is the things that I'm building in, those pillars and everything like that. Now let's try to combine it all together and really get in tune. We're doing different stuff. We're making podcasts. We're making content. We're adding value there. Let's try to pull it back and make sure that we are keeping ourselves healthy, both like from a physical perspective and like a psychological, mental, like you said, anxiety and everything like that. We could definitely, jump into that, because that has just plagued so many people, and it's so easy to slip into that type of trap. And I think it really gets just easier and easier when you're not trying to make mental checks every once in a while and just trying to do that type of thing. So I don't know. I think it's all related.
It is all related. And I one of the things I love about your perspective is that living in the modern world, if you seek it, you shall find every perspective, information,
Right.
whatever it is you want. There are 1,000 to the 1,000th power of articles, opinions, information, research papers. And I think that taking advantage of that when it comes to the mind, taking advantage of that when it comes to understanding how you perceive every moment, taking inspiration from the Western ideals of progress, dopaminergic goal seeking, and some of the Eastern ideals, or at least ideals that came out of the East, that are more centered around gratitude, love, in the moment pleasure. And I don't mean that pleasure in the moment of like, oh, I'm going to take 6 shots and have fun. I mean that more of like in a meditative state where you look at the tree to your right and you say that is a beautiful tree. Look at that green. I am in the moment. Like all of these types of things, these different viewpoints. I think that we live in a world which should take more advantage of the fact that we can be exposed to all of these things. Mm-hmm. And as somebody, I consider myself to be a very open person, somebody that's always interested in a new idea. And for me, the internet age is good because I can look into all these weird, crazy ideas, some of them good, some of them bad, just go all over the place and kind of, like you said, synthesize my own version of what I want my human experience to be. And that is very different from even our parents' generation, certainly any generation before them, where it was much more closed off, much more corralled in terms of what they were exposed to. Yeah. And I think that has downsides. We see a lot of downsides with the modern transfer of information. And my idea of it is that we can, through the power of podcasts, information, whatever it is, kind of communicate to a lot of people that it doesn't have to be this version of the internet where you're exposed to YouTube algorithms, Instagram algorithms, where you're constantly corralled in whatever viewpoint you have, and you're sheltered, and the internet is more or less just a harvesting place for your attention so advertisers and companies can make money. But if you use it right, the internet can really be a liberating place of YouTube channels, of Instagram pages or web pages or Wikipedia or research articles. It can be just as liberating as it is confining. Mm-hmm. That's the ultimate irony in our world, is that the ultimate tool we have for information transfer can be the most liberating thing or the most confining thing. And I think, unfortunately, the business model of most internet-based companies has pushed more people towards the confining side than it has towards the liberating side. Mm-hmm. So, not to rant on that too much. Yeah. I feel like we've spent a little too much time talking about all this philosophical stuff. So,
I mean, no, I think it's important, but like, there's so much to it. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's right. so much, because for me, it's always like the moderation thing too. It's like, you got to make sure, like you were talking about with the internet or anything like that, there's like a level where, you can go really, really crazy with it. And that might be too much. You could always go down like rabbit holes and stuff like that, and you could end up being like somewhere totally lost. And it's like, I don't know if it's productive at that point, right?
Right.
But at the same, it's kind of like thinking about God in a sense. Not to bring it back to the religion type thing, but it's like thinking about that. There's no real answers, and for somebody that's tries to be relatively logical and like analytical with a lot of things, it's tough because you want an answer, and you're not really going to get like a straight answer, Mm-hmm. So I don't know. It can be tough like that. But yeah, man, I don't have all the answers. I don't know about God and like all that sort of stuff. I mean, it's an interesting topic. And like you said, I mean, we can go on for hours about like the philosophical type thing. And maybe we'll touch on it again, just with some of I know that we've already mentioned Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris. Those types of thinkers are very interesting in the way that I just love the way that they present their arguments and all that sort of stuff. But let's dive into a little bit more about what you have going on with your research and everything. Now, I know a lot of this is probably going to be way over my head and maybe some of our viewers' heads, but I think if there's a lot of more practical application, I would say, right, that you have like, on the horizon and everything. So, I mean, if you want to kind of give, an overview of everything that you're doing, I know we touched on a little bit in the beginning, but I think that it's really cool stuff. So
yeah, most definitely. Well, give me a free pass to talk about my research. Won't pass that up, but yeah. I want to start with an analogy that I love.
Yeah.
So we're in your studio right now. Unfortunately, I don't think I see any plants or anything living, but I'll still make it work.
Yeah.
So, we're sitting in a studio right now. We got microphones, headphones. There's a camera here. I'm sure there's a laptop somewhere. Mm-hmm. What do you think is the most amazing piece of technology in this room right now?
You know what? I was already asked this question on a phone call, and I can't remember.
You're blowing my cover. You're blowing my cover.
What is it? The answer that I should have gave. I don't know. What is it?
Well, you should have guessed the laptop, right? That was. So every day we wake up, right? 7 in the morning, 8 in the morning, whatever, maybe 9 if you're lazy, but just kidding. But we check our phone, we go to our laptop, we go to our internal plumbing, whatever it is.
Yep.
And we think, wow, this technology is amazing. Mm-hmm. And that's true. That technology is incredible. But what we miss is when we walk past the plant that we have in the hallway, the flowers that your mom or wife planted in the living room, the thousands of blades of grass that are on your field, the trillions of bacteria that exist all over the place. Every day, we miss the fact that biology, that living organisms are actually the most impressive piece of technology that exists on Earth. Mm. And I think the checkmate to this argument is me, is you, is the, 7 billion almost 7 billion other people that exists. biology is such a complicated piece of technology that you and I are talking, our listeners are listening, through a 2.5, 3 pound organ of cells, of biological material called the brain, that is able to accomplish this. And we fail to realize that our laptops, our microphones, our iPhones all came from a piece of biotech, from a piece of biology. And that is where my research lies. The 20th century was amazing. The 18th century, let's start there. Let's start at the 18th century. That was the century of chemistry. We developed the periodic table, Mendeley. We discovered elements. We understood the difference between an atom, between a molecule. I mean, granted, some of this was done in the 20th century as well, but really the 19th, man, the 19th is where that happened, right? Then we get into the 20th century, and we have this explosion of physics, of mechanics, of relativity with Einstein. Quantum theory developed in that century. This explosion of understanding of the basic mechanics of physics and what governs the universe. So we have chemistry, we have physics, and the 21st century is going to be biology. The 21st century is going to be where we understand the power of DNA, the power of ribosomes, of proteins, of cellular signaling. That is the 21st century. And that is what I like to think that I'm involved with, because my research is surrounded around the design and production of what are called recombinant silk proteins. Recombinant silk is, or let's start with the word recombinant. Recombinant is a fancy name for a protein that an organism, such as you or myself, produces, which it would not have produced naturally. So a great example of this is insulin. In, I believe it was the 80s, the first FDA approved recombinant drug was insulin. So insulin is, I'm sure a lot of people, a lot of listeners have heard about insulin. It's a very important hormone that I'm sure we can kind of talk about later if we get into some nutritional biochem, aka my hobby.
Definitely,
but
yeah.
If we get into that, insulin is a protein. It's a hormone and a protein that is synthesized by a gene, a set of DNA base pairs. Are you type 1 diabetic?
I'm not.
And I am not either. So that means that we each have the genetic code and the pancreatic capacity to produce insulin in our pancreatic beta cells. The alpha cells produce glucagon. The beta cells produce insulin. And what happens is that our beta cells read a piece of DNA and make insulin. And it's awesome. We absorb sugar, amino acids. It's a good hormone. We need it. And the first FDA-approved drug to use recombinant technologies took this piece of DNA, put it into bacteria. I believe it's E. coli. I could be wrong, but I believe it's E. coli. And they produce that enzyme recombinantly and then use it as a drug for type 1 diabetics, potentially type 2 diabetics as well, right? So that is kind of our first window into the future of biotech. And where I sit is doing the same type of thing, but with silk proteins. So a lot of people hear silk, and they think of, you know, a silk kimono, a silk scarf, silk underwear maybe, right, if you're that type of guy. But they don't realize that it's actually a protein. And it happens to be the most miraculous biomaterial protein that exists. In terms of toughness, silk outperforms almost any other natural or man-made material. And by toughness, this means the total amount of energy absorbed by the material. And what's more fascinating is that silk is one of the most lightweight, high-performance materials we know of. So it's wondrous. It can do amazing things. It's biocompatible, meaning that you can ingest it or put it into the body, and there are no adverse effects. It has optical properties. It has torsional memory, mechanical strength, toughness, as I've mentioned, and elasticity. It is a really amazing material that I believe, and many people in my field believe, has potential in applications that you wouldn't even think of. Optical devices, biomedical implants, food coatings, things of that nature. So my work revolves around designing pieces of DNA that will produce what we call silk mimetic proteins. So silk is a very interesting material, very, very interesting, and it shows us the extent of the beauty of evolution. And evolution, it is wondrous, and I don't use that word lightly.
Yeah.
Because silk proteins are naturally produced mainly by insects, and in fact, I think exclusively by insects, right? And they have been around in the evolutionary history for 400 million years. That is a long time for something to be conserved through evolution, right? I mean, you think about modern humans. We've been around for what, arguably 2 million years with Homo erectus, 1.5, 1 million years, somewhere in that time frame, right? So, I mean, we are a blip on the radar compared to silk proteins. It's on the order of I mean, it's past dinosaurs, you know. So these proteins are wondrous, and there's a lot of things we can do with them. So what I do on a day-to-day basis in the lab is I design silk proteins. Of course, there are naturally occurring silk proteins, and many researchers have just copied that DNA sequence and produced it, right? Well, let me take a step back. Let's, for the non-bio-oriented people, let's talk about what a protein actually is. A protein starts as DNA. You, me, all the listeners, everyone on Earth, for the most part, has 23 chromosomes in their cells, in the nucleus of their cells, right? So if you have a cell, it's like a little bubble. It's a little three-dimensional bubble. Within that bubble is another bubble in eukaryotic cells called a nucleus. And in that little internal bubble are 23 chromosomes for humans. Each one of those chromosomes is an extensive, very long, very complicated piece of DNA that has been wrapped around histone proteins. And that DNA is essentially read. An enzyme called RNA transcriptase, I believe, comes to the chromosome and scans it. They scan the chromosome just like you would scan part of a credit card. And they make something called RNA out of the DNA. RNA is fascinating because it actually is theorized by certain scientists that it existed before DNA, a hypothesis which I think has some serious support to it. But anyway, in our human cells, this RNA from our chromosomes gets turned, this DNA from our chromosomes gets turned into RNA. And then this is where the magic happens. This is the most, probably the fundamental, amazing piece of biotech that exists. This piece of RNA, you can imagine it as a long, kind of spaghetti-like piece of molecules, right? It goes down to the engineer of the bio realm, the ribosome. And the ribosome grabs this piece of spaghetti RNA and reads it like a book, like a sentence. And every time it reads it, it produces a protein, one amino acid at a time. There are 20, I believe, naturally occurring amino acids. And the ribosome reads the RNA, and the RNA essentially tells it what amino acids to bind together. And at the end of this, you have an extremely unique and complicated product called a protein. Proteins are the actuators of life, right? Now a lot of people listening, you hear about protein, you think, oh, I'm going to take my scoop away, go hit the bench press.
Yeah.
Or you think, I'll get my steak, get my protein. Yeah. Of course, that is one function of proteins. Proteins help build muscle. But in reality, proteins are almost the exclusive actuator of life. Enzymes, which are a protein, and everything else, your muscle fibers, the way your neurons build connections, it's all protein-based. Protein is the essence of life. And what I do is I look at naturally occurring silk proteins. I have a particular focus on spider silk because spider silk is actually the most mechanically robust out of all silk proteins. I mean, with some exceptions, but in general, right? Hey, come on, I'm a PhD scientist. Like, every time I say something, it's going to be with the caveat of with exceptions, right?
Yeah.
So I look at the naturally occurring silk proteins and I design pieces of DNA that aren't necessarily exactly the same, but mimic it. Because what we have found through research is that you don't need to make it exactly the same. You just need to make it close.
Right.
You need to get a couple parts of the protein right, and then you can move forward from there with something that acts exactly like silk or very close to it. And this is advantageous because silk proteins are very difficult for organisms outside of spiders and silkworms to make. They are very unique, very large, and frankly, very tough to make proteins for certain organisms. So that's kind of one of the things in the field that I myself have been working on is how do we make these proteins in species that we can scale up to a bioprocess and ultimately bring to the world? Because if you look at natural silk proteins, silkworm silk protein is great. We've harvested it for years. There's those history lessons about the Silk Road. It's awesome. But there's a lot of untapped potential with silk proteins that can be harvested by producing them in microorganisms. There's a lot of untapped potential, particularly with spider silk proteins. A lot of things we could do with those proteins that we have not been able to capitalize on because unlike silkworms, you cannot produce large amounts of silk proteins in spiders. They are cannibalistic. They are territorial. If you have 2 spiders in a cage, the next morning, there's probably only going to be 1 spider. So we have this biomaterial that we've discovered that's amazing, spider silk proteins and their derivatives, that are untapped by humanity. And just to kind of bring this full circle is that the work I do looks at spider silk proteins, obviously, but with biotech in general for the 21st century, there are so many untapped proteins, so many untapped signaling pathways. We are looking at a platform for the manipulation and the harvesting of evolution of the universe, of the most complicated engineering platform, the most diverse and the most productive engineering platform that's ever existed. I mean, ultimately, humans are a product of that. And we are just beginning to tap into that power. If you think about Earth a few billion years ago, you think about the universe 12 billion years ago, there were no humans. There was no consciousness that we know of. And the 21st century will be spearheaded by humanity tapping into the most revolutionizing engineering technology that's ever existed, in my opinion.
Lot to unpack there.
Sorry. Just cut me off if I go too long.
No. Honestly, it was all good, and I was thinking of different things because that was extremely important context, right? For our viewers that, and even like I said, myself, that, you go through grade school, you go through, biology class and all that stuff. And like a lot of those terms that you said in there, like RNA, DNA, ribosome, like all that sort of stuff, like, it's like I had to take a test and it was like a nice little graphic. And it's like, okay, great. This is where this stuff is. This is what it does. That was whatever. But now when you hear about it and you actually hear it in an application sense, it makes a lot more sense. It's a lot more applicable to life. And as you're going in here, and I want to dive deeper into this because I want to ask, I have a few questions, and we can kind of be like, kind of go back and forth on sort of like building on those fundamentals, building on like everything that you kind of just, laid out there of like what you have now, what you've been working on, and what the future looks like, right? First question is an interesting one. I don't know if some of these, I apologize if some of these are like ignorant in the fact of, because I don't know anything about this, right? Other than what we've talked about so far. The first one though, is kind of separate from that. How many people, this is like a relatively new-ish thing, right? I mean, like you've been working on this, right? People have been working on this type of thing, but how many people in the world would you say are doing the thing that you're doing right now?
Well, I'm going to divide this up into two categories.
Okay.
So the first is people doing silk, recombinant silk type research, right? And the second is people doing biotech in general. So people doing biotech in general is very high. A huge portion of that comes from pharma, basically from pharma.
Right.
So biotech, under the umbrella of biotech, is pharmaceuticals, which would also the COVID vaccine, which has got a huge amount of press, a very important thing in our lives right now, that falls under that umbrella. So there's a lot of people doing biotech, a lot. It's certainly grown in the past few decades, but it's existed for a while. I mean, you look back in I believe it was the 50s with Jonas Salk at Pitt was the polio vaccine. So it's existed for a while. I'd say the modern the modern start of biotech probably came with the discovery of DNA in the 50s by Watson and Crick, kind of at the same time with the polio vaccine and stuff like that. You know, really mid 20th century is really when this started to take off. You know, really with Watson and Crick, the discovery of DNA unleashed. I mean, that's the code to life. It's the code to proteins. Yeah. It's everything we are is our DNA for the most part. You could even argue that differences in personality ultimately are attributed to a DNA's response to stimuli. You know, nature versus nurture. Is it really nurture or is it all nature? That question remains to be answered. But with my work, specifically recombinant silk, much fewer. It's a much smaller subset of biotechnology. So biomaterials in general is a little bit bigger. You have things like collagen, elastin, silk. A lot of things fall under the umbrella of biomaterials, and that's a bigger research area. But with silk itself, I'd say maybe a dozen groups, maybe a dozen research groups in the world. It's more focused because it's newer.
Yeah.
It's something that we only had the technology to explore within the past 30 years. And it's something that, you know, frankly, there's not a whole lot of research groups focusing on. It's a growing field. It's new. There's people getting into it, and I mean, when I say that it's a growing field, I mean that in terms of biomaterials, biotech in general. It's just growing, you know, except for maybe the pharma. The drugs are a little bit of an outlier in that term, because they've been here for longer. They're obviously the monetary incentive is much higher. But in terms of other biotech, it's new, and there's fewer people involved with it than should be. There should definitely be more, and it's going to grow. But it's few. With silk, it's probably about 12.
Wow.
Yeah.
And okay, this is another maybe insignificant numbers question, but like, what is, when you say like 12 dozen groups, to give us an actual idea of that, what is like, so you are part of one research group, we could say, right? So how many people are we talking per group?
It really varies.
Okay.
It really varies. So my group, I'm technically in 2 labs. I have, as a PhD student, you have a professor that serves as your advisor. And so you kind of work under them. They give you direction. You help them do research ideas they have. You have some of your own. And then ultimately you get your PhD, right? In my group, I'm in 2 because I'm co-advised by 2 professors, Professor Zah, Professor Kofis.
So you're in 2 of the 12 groups.
Well, I consider this co-advised group as one.
No, I was just kidding.
ZA group is about 6 members, and Kofis lab is about 6 members as well, roughly speaking. Then the other labs, it varies. So you have people like David Kaplan. I believe he's at Tulane, much larger group. You have Thomas Scheibel in Germany. I think he has a very large group as well. There's a Swedish group, Jan Johansson. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. I'm not Swedish, but I don't know how big her group is. But generally, they range from about 4 to 12. I'd say that's about how it is. You go to some world-class universities like Harvard and MIT, those research labs are going to have dozens of people, like 20, 30, 40 plus. But so I'd say in terms of people, let's say 12 times 12, 144, right?
Yeah.
there's probably only a few hundred people in the world that are focused specifically on silk. But that's kind of how it has to work in science. It, and this kind of goes to a broader point that I always think about is that if you look at somebody like Isaac Newton back in was it the 1550s? I think
You're asking the wrong guy.
we're gonna have fact checkers on my ass, right? I believe it was sometime in the early 1500s. Physics didn't exist. I mean, there was no physics, and that kind of opened the playing field for a once in 100-year mind like his to just uncover an entire field. If you look at 2020, we have made so much progress as a civilization that in order to even become an expert in something, it takes 10 years of school. Obviously I went to high school, obviously, 4 years of college, 5 years of graduate school. I mean, this is adding up to basically a decade of school. And by the end of that decade, I'm basically qualified to make discoveries in one field: biomaterials, metabolic engineering, which is a fancy name for making things in bacteria, making recombinant proteins in bacteria. And so I think that with each biomaterial, that's kind of what you need is you need a few hundred experts in each biomaterial. And there's a lot of biomaterials, but that's what you need to really make progress. And it's one of the things that I think is great about the Western world. I think is great about America, about Europe, about wherever it is that somebody's studying, Asia, Africa, wherever it is. I think that it's a cool thing, man. I think that as humans, we gotta, at this point in our development, we have to team up the brain power and just try to make little innovations where we can. Because, if somebody like me, hopefully, can make a little innovation here, there's 144 others in silk. There's 400 others in biomaterials, and those add up. So,
yeah. Well, I knew this was revolutionary stuff when we started talking about this because I had no idea what it was, and it seemed like your outlook on it and everything, all the information was, starting to add up to be something. I did not know that you were one of only the 100 or so people like working on this. So that is absolutely tremendous, and very exciting. And like you said, I think it's interesting, the way that you put that, where you kind of said like it almost has to be that way, right? In science, and the way that you're developing things. The questions here are kind of just coming at me, so I'm just gonna throw them at you because I'm interested in the process. I'm interested in the actual science of it, and I'm really interested in the process because something like this, where you're only dealing with a certain level of people right now. I mean, in all things considered, you're a pioneer. You're one of the couple hundred pioneers of this technology, this microbiology and biotech like sphere here of silk proteins and everything like that. What are you guys doing? Like you mentioned some of the people in other countries, right? In other parts of the world. What are you guys doing? I guess, how are you teaming up? Like, is that an actual thing? Like, is your lab team up with everybody else? Like, do you guys have like, I'm just spitballing ideas here. Do you have like calls? Do you have some sort of, I know the internet is a thing, so you can probably just look there, but is it really a team effort? Is there competition somehow in science that I'm not aware of? I know there's a business side of it too, to a certain degree, once you get to like products and things and actual, like you have findings, but have you been like, have you experienced any of that?
So I chuckle because this is a great question. And this speaks to the beauty of the current system we live in that, yes, there are collaborations, and yes, there is communication, but at the same time, it's very competitive. So it all comes down to publishing, really, in academia at least, in terms of, these groups I mentioned, Zookofis, where I work for, Kaplan, Jan Johansson in Sweden, Scheibel in Germany. There's certainly competition between all of us, but for academia, one of the keys to success, if not the only key to success, probably not the only one, but certainly possibly the top one, is publishing. You want to publish papers in the best journals that you can. And when you publish, that information becomes public domain. So if I publish a paper on producing recombinant silk proteins in E. coli, for instance, I write about that, I publish a scientific paper, hopefully it gets in a good journal, everyone can see it. All the other silk groups can see it. So in that way, it's collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it's competition.
Mm-hmm.
You know, my professors versus our competitors are going to want to do the best work that they can, are going to want to publish in the best journals that they can. So in a lot of ways, I'm critical of academia. But in one of the ways that I'm not is that I think it's a good system because, you know, the reason this is such a good question is that in such a specialized world, in a world where we need each other so much to make innovation because we are so complicated. You know, I mean, one person can't build an iPhone.
Right.
One person can't build a Tesla. You need thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people to do that. We need collaboration. But at the same time, human nature is competition. The human nature of innovation is competition. And I think there's a good balance of that, at least in my own sphere of academia. You know, the engineering sciences are much, much different than other fields of academia. So I can only speak to the one I'm in. But it really is a balance between collaboration and competition. And I think it fosters innovation. I really think it does. You know, my own personal work, the proteins I designed, the bacterial species I picked, a lot of that was based on previous literature. I mean, the life of a PhD student is, I want to do something new and cool. Let's look at the literature to see how I can do it.
Yeah.
So it's very much a balance, very much a balance.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't want to say that answer is surprising, but because, you know, I'm kind of like a capitalist, right? With the stuff that I do, entrepreneurship and all that sort of stuff. And I know we haven't gotten into the business aspect yet, but just from the point of like you said, even human nature, competitive, right? You want to be the best because it fuels everybody to continue to get better, right? I think that's kind of the, you know, what it really boils down to. It's interesting though that you have these different groups in different countries, very few. That's the thing, right? It's like, it's not like everybody in the world is trying to do this. It's like like percentage of a percent, right? And the fact that there is collaboration, but you said it almost comes in the form of just like, we figured this out like 2 months ago, like 3 months ago. Here's a paper. Here's a paper that we just published. So yeah, if you're not there yet, you can get to this level, but we're already, you know, further ahead. So it's just interesting to me. It's interesting to me the way that it is, but again, it's not surprising because it's like, you know, your lab wants to probably get to this point, like the product point or whatever it is, you know, whatever the case may be, whatever the end goal is, which we could talk about that too, because I think that's important. But like your lab wants to get to this goal before, you know, the lab in Germany, the lab in Sweden or whatever, because then I guess, you know, more, I'm sure like more funding, more, you know, just like, you know, like prestige, credibility, prestige.
It's very good for the professors. The professors are very into that for sure. And of course they are. That's their career is to publish the best research, get the most funding, get the most prestige. And that's the beauty of a meritocracy in a way, you know. And I think you asked a little bit earlier, a little bit more about the process. And I think that for the listeners, it would be good to go through that. Because for me to sit here and say, I make recombinant silk proteins, that's cool, but I know for myself personally, I don't really know what's going on until somebody describes it to me like brass tacks. So let me see. Let me break this down here. But basically, as I mentioned, we start with DNA. And this is very similar to what I do and a lot of other silk groups. And it's miraculous. You can actually order a piece of custom-made DNA from companies. I mean, that is how far. Yeah, exactly. That is how far we have come in 60 years, 70 years. You know, I talk about this a lot. Is that, you know, computer science gets all the hype because we went from having the first computer in what was it, the 40s or 50s, probably the 50s. I think they used them on the Apollo missions. Like the 50s, we had the first computer. We had the advent of computer science. We had Alan Turing in the 40s make the Turing machine, which was like the first huge step. He's kind of like the father of computing, right? And between the 40s and 50s up to 2020, we have iPhones in our pocket. That's amazing. That's 70 years of the first discovery of a field all the way to the advent of this in everyday life for consumers, for people. And not enough people know that story is starting to become very similar for biotech. I mean, we didn't even discover the structure of DNA until the freaking 50s, man.
Yeah.
Like the 50s, okay? And here we are a couple decades later, or maybe more than a couple, 50, 60 years, 70 years later, and I can go online and just buy a piece of DNA.
Can anyone do that, or do you need like a license?
Anybody
I could
can
buy a piece of DNA.
You could buy a piece of DNA.
How much does that cost?
It depends on the DNA. Depends on. We can get into that conversation.
I'm going after we're done here. We're looking up some DNA.
Yeah, we're gonna buy some DNA.
I wish we had a TV here like JRE or somebody where we could just pull up DNA.
Jamie, pull up that DNA.
Jamie, pull up DNA.
Yeah. But it's amazing, man. You can just buy a gene. You can buy a piece of DNA. I mean, there's certainly limitations, but you can do it for the most part. And so that's where the process starts. Now, with silk proteins, it's particularly difficult. So silk proteins are generally about 300 to 700 kilodaltons in size. And I'll break that down for you.
Yeah, this is very hard for me to understand.
I'll break that down for you.
Yeah.
Don't worry about what a kilodalton means, but I'll put it in perspective. Albumin, which is a very important, very common protein in pretty much all mammals, to my knowledge, is about like 60, 62, right? So silk proteins are 5 to over 10 times as large as a common protein in your body. What that means is that the genes are very, very long. So that's a problem. It's hard for companies to make a very large gene. It's even harder for companies to make a silk gene, because silk is extremely, extremely repetitive. In terms of the DNA codons, DNA base pairs, that'll make more sense for the listeners. The DNA base pairs and the amino acids, very repetitive. In a silk protein, for instance, out of the 20 naturally occurring amino acids, we basically only use like 6, maybe 5. Very, very repetitive protein. Most proteins have much more diversity. So what that means is that these genes are repetitive, they're long, and they also happen to be what's called a high GC content. DNA is made up of 4 interlocking pieces. GCAT, guanidine, cytosine, adenine, and thymine, right? GCs have 3 hydrogen bonds between their base pairs, while ATs only have 2. Which means that GCs are a lot freaking harder to make. It has to do with energetics, chemistry. I won't go into it.
Right.
So a silk gene is long, repetitive, and high GC. All 3 of these things make it very hard to synthesize synthetically. So what we have to do, how we start a recombinant silk project, is by buying what we call a 1 monomer. So 1 monomer obviously makes up part of a polymer. So what's a good example? It's hard for me to think of.
I've heard of polymers
like,
before.
Let's think of a beaded bracelet, right? So everyone, when you were a little kid, you made your own bracelets. You took a little bead, you put it on a string, you took another bead, you put it on a string. Each one of those beads, let's think of as a silk protein monomer. It's probably only about 35 amino acids, very small, maybe like 1 kilodalton, right? And so what we do is we buy that 1 monomer. But because silk proteins are so repetitive, we take this DNA and we literally chop it up and combine it. So we take multiple stalks, multiple aliquots of our 1 monomer, we chop it in very specific places, and we combine it with another storage that has been chopped in a slightly different way. But when we chop it this way and we combine it, it fuses together to make a 2 monomer. It's like if you took 1 bead in your left hand, 1 bead in your right hand, and you just conjoined them. And now you have 2 beads, right? And then you repeat that process. So this time we have 2 beads in the left hand, we have 2 beads in the right hand, and we fuse them, and now we have 4. And we keep doubling and doubling until we get to the point where we have a silk protein gene that approaches the size of a normal native spider silk or silkworm silk gene.
Okay. Important question here.
Yeah.
Everything that you just did there, it made sense theoretically. Can you describe the actual way that you do that? Does that make sense? Does that question make sense? Like I'm watching you. How do you do that?
Yes. So simultaneously simple and extremely complicated.
Yeah,
like everything else in biology, right?
Yeah.
That's the best part about biology is well, there's two best parts about biology. The first is that everything is simultaneously simple looking and extremely complicated, right?
Yep.
The way that you're talking, the way that I'm talking, we're sitting here, looks simple, right? The most complicated thing that's ever existed in the universe, right? So that's one thing. The other thing about biology that is amazing is that there are no laws in biology, right? So in physics, we have laws, right? In math, we have laws. In biology, there are no laws. The central dogma is literally, as it says, the most central part of biology. DNA to RNA to protein, like I've explained earlier. There are things in biology that violate the central dogma. That is biology.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there are prions that do the opposite, you know.
Yeah.
So there are viruses that in some ways do the opposite. So, but to go back to your question about how we actually do this is we get the gene, right? We buy a gene. We buy our silk monomer, right? Our little mini, not even a silk protein, just tiny little thing, right?
Comes in a UPS box.
It comes in a FedEx box. You're not that far off. Comes in literally a FedEx envelope.
Yeah.
You open it. It's a tiny little tube. We call these tubes microcentrifuge tubes because they're tiny, dude. They're like the size of your pinky.
Oh my
size
gosh.
of your pinky.
Is there anything in there? Like, can you actually see it?
At the bottom of the tube is a little bit of like almost like white residue. Like if like you had a little bit of like protein shake that dried on your counter, like a little bit of residue.
Yeah.
That's your DNA.
Okay.
Right? Synthesized by a company in an amazing advancement of science, which I've explained, right?
Yeah.
Just want to hype it again.
Right, yeah.
Let's go, Watson and Crick. And you dissolve it in some water, and then you take it and you mix it with bacteria or whatever species you want to put it in. My lab
in a little petri dish thing, or like
not yet. So it's a vial of frozen bacteria. And you take this little bit of DNA dissolved in water, just a tiny little bit, like a microliter. Like we're talking
a drop.
Like a bottle of wine is 750 milliliters.
Right.
I'm talking 1 microliter of DNA.
Less than a drop.
So like orders and orders of magnitude less, right?
Right.
So like 1/1000th divided by 750 a bottle of wine, and you put it in the bacteria. Which is basically frozen. You thawed a little bit. And then you can do various procedures. I usually do a heat shock. So you put it in hot water for a minute. And then you plate it on, like you said, a plate.
Yeah.
You know, like you see. And then you can screen. Basically, any colonies that grow should have that DNA in it. And so now you have a stock of bacteria. I use a lot of E. coli. We use other species, but can't really talk about it. Not published work yet. Not patented work yet.
Sorry, Germany.
Yeah, sorry, Germany. We're coming for you. But and then it's in your bacteria. So you grow the bacteria. And as the bacteria grow, I mean, and it's simple. You put them in what we call LB medium is usually what I grow them in. It's a mixture of proteins, salts. It's actually a digest of milk protein. So it's very nutrient rich. And by digest, I mean that enzymes have been put into there to break down the casein and whey into smaller peptides that the bacteria like, smaller proteins. And the bacteria grows. And it grows and it replicates your DNA. It makes more and more of it. That's naturally what cells do. Any DNA that's in cells, they replicate it, right? That's I think everybody did this in middle school biology, the mitosis. And if your sex cell is meiosis, that type of stuff, right? And then we harvest it. We can harvest the DNA out of the bacteria. We break open the cells. We harvest the DNA out of them. And then comes the real fun, where we take the DNA and we use enzymes to cut it. We actually cut the DNA exactly where we want. So in my case, I cut out my silk gene from 1 aliquot of cells, and I cut it out in the same way almost from another aliquot of cells. I harvest that cut DNA and I fuse it in what's called a ligation reaction, where a T4 ligation enzyme fuses this cut DNA, which has been cut by restriction enzymes, and then repeat the process.
Gotcha.
Mix that ligation with a little bit of DNA, and boom, you've went from a 1 monomer silk gene to a 2, then you go from a 4 to a 8, and however many you want to do. Then,
hang on, let me stop you a second.
Go, stop me.
So that process right there, again, makes like so much sense in theory, because I understand what you're doing like as a whole. If you're doing that, let me ask you this first question. From like so you said in there, you're literally like cutting the protein, you're like fusing stuff together,
Cutting the DNA,
right? And you're doing all that sort of stuff. Does that take how long does that take? Does that like take a while? Like, I mean, are you, because my question, here's my question. Let's say, let me use almost like let me say it and ask it in a different way. So let's say Monday morning, right? You and I, we drive up to Albany. Okay, we go in the lab.
You coming with me?
I'm coming with you.
All right.
Okay. I don't know if I'm allowed. I don't know what I have to. I don't know if there's clearances. I gotta like get certain things. It doesn't matter.
I need an assistant.
So I come in there. You need an assistant. Yeah. So you need an assistant on Monday. I'm not gonna do anything because I don't know what the hell I'm doing. But I'm gonna come in. So I come in the lab with you, right? And you know, I guess you wear certain things. You gotta be like kind of sterile and shit. Is that like a thing?
Yeah, we follow all the PPE rules. No sarcasm intended.
Whatever you have to do, we're doing that before we walk in the lab. And then you walk in and you're going to do this process that you just talked about, right? So imagine that I am like, again, like kind of standing like right by you, and you're doing all of that, because you gave like the theoretical, but I think let me give you the actual root of this question. The root of this question is with me and with other people that like hear this. This is groundbreaking shit, right? But I think the reason that maybe sometimes people lose focus or they get turned off, or they don't realize what it is because the first problem is they can't realize that part. They can't realize, like me and you, like we're talking about this, and like you're very passionate and you know where it's gonna go and all the like the benefits of it. So you see it, and then you tell me, and I'm like, oh, okay, I totally understand that. I think where sometimes people might get lost is like, well, what the fuck is he talking about? like cutting a DNA, like, you know, cutting DNA and doing that sort of stuff. So like I'm going to tell you what I imagine it looks like, and then you tell me what it actually looks like, right? Like from a physical, like in the world perspective. You have like a microscope or something, and you have like the plate, like a petri dish type thing, or you know, whatever the good term is, and you're like literally have like some sort of like a little tool or something, and you're cutting all that sort of stuff. If that's completely wrong, because I don't know anything, but that's what I'm super interested in too, and I think like it would just tie it all together, because people could then be like, oh, he's doing all of this for this reason, and this is exactly how it's doing it.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
So yeah, that's a great question, and it is very hard in some ways to communicate to people because we cannot see DNA. DNA is so small, tiny. I mean, it's a very large molecule,
right?
But the parts of that molecule are very small, right? So when I say I'm cutting it, when I say I'm conjoining it or ligating it, as we say in the field, I literally have a vial of DNA. I mean, it's like a biotech sci-fi movie. It really is. Yeah. It's funny. I'll have a vial, and it looks clear. It's just water mostly. Right. And DNA will be in there. Mm-hmm. And I go to the freezers where we keep our enzymes, and I'll take what's called a restriction enzyme out of another vial that's clear. Yeah. It's usually stored in glycerol, so it's clear. And I just take a little bit out of that vial, and I put it in my DNA vial, and I let it sit at a certain temperature for like an hour. Yeah. And there's a reaction happening in there where things are being cut. The enzyme is cutting the DNA. Like if you had a piece of spaghetti and you were just cutting it with scissors at certain spots. Mm-hmm. That's what I mean by cutting.
Interesting.
And I take that DNA and I load it into a gel, an agarose gel. Agarose is a polymer, and you mix it with water and it forms a gel. You mix it with a buffer. It has some salt in it, and it forms a gel. And I take my little mixture of DNA and enzyme, and I put it into the gel, and I put electrical current on the gel.
Okay.
And what happens is that in that gel, the smaller fragments of DNA, they move faster through it, because this gel is a polymer matrix, what we call a hydrogel. And in that polymer matrix, it's going to be hard for the viewers to see, but you see how my fingers are I'm interlocking my fingers? Mm-hmm. That's a polymer gel. It's like it's like a solid with all of these steel beams going each way through it.
Right.
And obviously, if you're smaller, you can move through that quicker. Now, DNA is negatively charged. That's why we use an electric field. So the smaller pieces get pulled by the charge and they move through quicker. The larger pieces are still negatively charged, but because they're large, they move much slower through this minefield of steel beams, right? And then I take this gel after running it for about a half hour, and I put it under UV light.
Right.
Another great thing about DNA is that using certain chemicals, you can view it under UV light. And I view it under UV light, and I can see my bands of DNA. I can see where the DNA has separated. For instance, at the bottom of the gel, and these gels look like a small piece of paper. At the bottom piece of paper will be a really vibrant band that is my little DNA. I don't want the little DNA. I want my silk gene, which is bigger, and that's going to be at the top. And I cut it out with a razor out of the gel.
Yeah.
And then I go through a series of experiments where I extract it from the gel and I set up the ligation. So the ligation is where we double the size of the silk gene. And I take basically another mixture of my DNA, but this time it has been purified. It's my cut up DNA. And I mix it with another enzyme. Same process as I described before with the restriction enzyme. I mix it with this new enzyme called T4 DNA ligase, and it conjoins, it what's the word I'm looking for? It fuses these pieces of spaghetti, these pieces of DNA, and boom, new DNA. And then you move forward from there. And I think that sums up the DNA process pretty well. And then once we have a piece of DNA that we're happy with, that we want to turn into protein, we put it into, it's called transforming. We transform it into whatever species we want. We're working with mainly bacterial species. I can talk about E. coli. I can't really talk about the others. But we put this piece of DNA in the same process I described earlier. We transform it into the bacteria. That piece of DNA gets in there, and then we do what's called a protein expression. We have a big flask, a huge 1 liter Erlenmeyer flask like everyone has seen in high school science. We have that filled with a liquid culture of bacteria. It's a cloudy solution of bacteria that grows, not something you'd want to drink.
I was literally just thinking that.
And as the bacteria grows, it makes our protein. We do what's called inducing expression, where we will add in a very, very specific chemical, which tells the bacteria not just to replicate and preserve this gene, but to produce a protein from it. It's a very profound difference. We all have genes in our bodies that we do not produce proteins from. Many of them, in fact, probably more genes that we aren't currently producing proteins from than we are. But that's the thing about genes, is they can be turned on. In humans, it's called epigenetics. In a lot of species, it's called epigenetics. In bacteria with recombinant production, we call it inducing. We give the bacteria a chemical called IPTG, and it tells the bacteria, okay, no longer just hold on to this gene, but actually start making protein from it. And then the bacteria makes it, and we harvest it from them through a pretty boring procedure called lysis, but we harvest it from them and then purify it, and you've got silk protein. So, but it's very analogous to epigenetics, which is essentially epigenetics is like the code for how our software turns into hardware. Our 23 chromosomes, which I spoke about earlier, that's our software. That's our iOS. That's our Windows, whatever. What are they on? 12? I don't know.
10.
10?
I think they're just ending on 10.
I just add one every year just in case, right? That's the software. But Windows isn't going to pull up Microsoft Word. Windows isn't going to pull up, maybe not Google Chrome's not a good example, but Internet Explorer, right? Windows isn't going to pull up Internet Explorer until you click on Internet Explorer.
Right.
Same with the silk gene. Same with our own genes. There's stimuli that will determine what genes get turned on, what genes get turned off. And we do a simple, analogous procedure of that in our bacteria when we make silk protein. And it's actually one of the most exciting aspects about modern genetics research is understanding our epigenetics, which is what genes in you, what genes in me and all of our listeners have been turned on and turned off based on the stimuli. I had that extra beer last night, or I didn't get my 8 hours of sleep this week, or I'm in a competitive situation. All of these things that we think of as just mundane aspects of life affect our genetic expression. And it's the same with bacteria.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. So as far as like the tools and the things that you actually in the lab, right? Like you're in the lab and you're doing all sorts of different stuff, and you're making things, you're ligating things. I don't know if that's right. That's a verb, but
yeah.
like you're doing all that sort of stuff. And the one part specifically that made me think about this was when you were saying that you could see it under UV light. Like, are you using any tools, or are you literally just kind of like mixing and kind of doing that sort of stuff? Like, are you able to see anything of what you're doing? I think that's a big disconnect too, just from the way that I try to visualize things. It's like I'm so in the, I don't call it the real world. It's all the real world, but like the macro universe, I want to say, I guess you could say, I don't know, whatever, the macro of it, that when it gets down to the micro, it's like, what the hell is even going on type of thing. Right. So like, how do you just know, and then you just know from science that if I mix this with this is going to happen, and then if I do a certain thing, or you can't see anything? That's the part that I think I'm still disconnected on.
So the gel with the UV light, that's the one point where you can see something. Okay. You can see your DNA. Also, when we try to put DNA in bacteria, it doesn't work every time. And that's where the plates, and you can actually see the bacteria growing on this Petri dish. Right. You can see it, the Petri dish. Right. So those are two times where you can see something, right? Other than that, not really. And here's kind of the funny part about my work is that when I'm doing experiments, I don't use anything high tech. Yeah. But when I'm analyzing experiments, that is where the tech comes into play. So for instance, to set up a restriction digest, which is essentially where I cut up DNA in a very specific way because I want to duplicate the size of a silk gene, right? I use a pipette. That's about the most advanced piece of tech I use. Like it's a little handheld device, and you press down on the top of it and you let go, and it sucks up just a tiny little tiny volume of fluid. Like that. Remember when I was talking about like that 1 microliter stuff? Right. Yeah. It's that, right? Other than that, man, it's just tiny little plastic tubes and a Bunsen burner. That's about it. But the tech comes into play when we are using the machines to visualize and analyze our experiments. The UV machine that I was talking about, that's very expensive, very high tech. I use optical reading, absorbance readings for DNA concentration experiments. That's also, very high tech, very expensive. So a lot of things I use to analyze what's going on in the lab are much more high tech than what I use to actually do the experiments, which is funny. Like for instance, after we make silk protein, and we're trying to harvest it to do experiments with it, it's remarkably simple. I have a couple plastic test tubes and a centrifuge and some ice, and that's about it. I mean, it's remarkably simple compared to other equipment that you would need to perform experiments. And, I actually think there is a Netflix series out there about biotech right now. And the trailer to this, I haven't watched it yet because, I live it 10 hours a day. I don't necessarily want to go home and watch a series about the experiments I just did. But I remember seeing the trailer for it, and they said in the trailer, everyone thinks biotech is the realm of government-funded, cutting-edge scientific labs. And, of course, you do need some cutting-edge scientific equipment, but at the end of the day, like we were just talking, we could buy a gene right now that we custom made for $100, $200. I mean, we could buy a plasmid extraction, a DNA manipulation kit. We could buy restriction enzymes for $50, and they would ship them here on dry ice. Yeah. If we had $10,000, we could set up almost everything I needed to do here.
Wow.
Almost everything.
Right in the studio. We're going to do it next episode.
Yeah, next episode, we're gonna make a silk gene and make some protein,
we'll
make some coatings out of it, and yeah,
we'll do it on my YouTube channel. Yeah,
we're gonna make some high performance fibers and test them against steel.
Have you ever thought about like doing that? That'd be crazy if you did that like on your own YouTube channel or something like that. Just built a little lab right in your house.
I don't need to do it. MythBusters has done it. MythBusters actually has an episode, and everyone should look up this clip.
Yeah.
MythBusters has an episode where they, oh God, I don't know how much they had to pay people to do this, but they harvested like a entire rope of spider silk. Like that's how much funding I guess they have.
Oh my gosh.
They harvested an entire like I think it was a 1-inch diameter rope of spider silk, and they tested it against steel. I believe it was steel.
Yeah.
I could be wrong. And basically, what you do in a mechanical test is you hang a weight from it, and obviously, the whichever fiber can hold the most weight wins, right? The silk beat the steel.
That's crazy.
Silk beat the steel. Yeah.
That is unreal.
Well, there's been mathematical calculations that a pencil thin piece of like a pencil diameter piece of spider silk could stop a 747 jet from falling. So imagine that, a pencil thin piece of fiber.
Yeah.
You attach it to a 747, you drop the 747, and the silk holds it.
That's crazy.
There's no other material on earth that can do that.
Yeah.
And not to mention that it's 1/6 the density of steel, which is the most commonly used for bridges, steel cables, things like that. For good reason. It's great material, but you know, it just speaks to the wonder of this material and what we can do with it. And the fact that for you sitting here, the fiber example is a very obvious example of silk, right? Of course, everyone thinks of silk, they think of a fiber. You see spider web, you see a silk kimono, right? But the other applications are just incredible. You can make coatings, antimicrobial coatings, food preservation coatings. You can like a thin, you don't even know it's there, a coating. You can make hydrogels. You can make implants, optical devices. It's so diverse. You can make tissue engineering scaffolds in which mammalian cells attach to because you can alter the primary sequence of the protein. It speaks to just the potential that biomaterials in general have, especially silk, for the future of humanity.
So one thing I wanted to mention real quick, I'll put the links. I'll find that video for the MythBusters thing. I'll put it in the link. I'll put I'll try to find or if you want to send it to me, we can both look for that documentary. You'll probably be in the next Netflix documentary on silk. So
hopefully.
So when I'll make sure to share that when that comes out. And I also want to put the talk that you gave if that's cool with you.
Yes, yeah,
I'll
most
put that
definitely.
in there.
For anybody that is interested in biotech, biomaterials, I gave about a 50-minute presentation to a nonprofit called Materials Innovation Initiative. Shout out to them. Their whole mission is to bring biomaterials through a sustainable window to the world of textiles and consumer usage. And I was invited to give a presentation to them, and it covers everything about silk, from the very basics, the history, to what is recombinant production, what is a protein. For anybody that's been listening to this that's really interested in just getting a better idea of proteins and biotech and silk, I like to think that's a really great overview for it. So definitely check it out. I think you'll learn something. And as a science person, I just love when people learn things. So.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, I'll make sure that everything that is down in the show notes in the description, so you all check that out. But yeah, I think that what were you saying just before that?
I think I was done, but somehow I was gonna try to segue this into a little bit of nutritional biochemistry, which is my second Ph.D.
Well, that was actually specifically it too, because you were talking about food coatings, you were talking about all the other applications of like kind of like the future applications, and we can definitely go there because I know that's a big thing. Like it's a hobby of yours merged with like your professional kind of endeavors and kind of all that sort of stuff. And as we move into that, like maybe just that question, like, is any of that happening yet? Like, is silk being used for any of those things in, the marketplace per se, or how's that kind of going right now?
Yeah, great question. And it is. There are a handful of startups, my own included, that are trying to bring silk to the market, trying to bring these recombinant technologies to the market. And it's amazingly diverse. As I mentioned, silk proteins can be used for so many different things. We have Thomas Scheibel, who I mentioned. He has a startup in Germany that's focused on high performance fibers, things that really capture the toughness, the mechanical strength, the elasticity of natural silk proteins. And he's actually partnered with Airbus to produce fibers for them. Believe it or not, these fibers actually. Oh my gosh! Sorry.
You're good. You're good.
Just because I'm in the biosphere doesn't mean I'm immune to allergies, I guess. Sorry about that.
Oh, you're good.
But yeah, he's working on making high performance fibers for the aerospace industry who are seeking more flexibility and toughness. We also have companies that are very focused on textiles. Bolt Threads and Spiber are very interested in using recombinant silk for animal-free silk textiles. And then there's some others which are focused on other industries. Mori is focused on using silkworm silk protein for next-generation food coatings. And I don't know how much I should speak about my own startup, my own company that I'm building out of my own research. But we have some markets that we're very interested in. We're filing some IP over the next few months here. Which is one of the reasons that I can't really speak too much about it.
But you'll hear about it soon.
You'll hear about it soon. You'll hear about it soon. But we've eyed up on a 161 billion domestic market and a 1 trillion worldwide market for applications of the recombinant silk proteins that I'm producing. I won't say much more than that. But what I will say is that we're working on some really exciting stuff, mainly something surrounding upcycling. So I'm actually engineering a process right now to manufacture silk proteins out of plastic waste. Mm-hmm. And I won't say more than that, but it's very exciting. We are actually engineering this plastic bottle I'm holding that you have right next to you. I'm engineering a process, and I'm very close to perfecting it, around taking this plastic bottle and literally turning it into biodegradable silk proteins for applications.
Nice.
So big things to come on the horizon for that. And I'm looking forward to it. But there is a huge entrepreneurial hype about biomaterials, as there should be. These will be the materials that power the future. A little bit unrelated to silk, there's also a company called Ecovative, run by 2 RPI alums, which is where I go. So soft spot for them. But they are doing amazing things with mycelium, which are actually mushroom proteins. And they have literally built, I think it's like 100-foot high structures out of that. They are a full-blown company.
Wow.
They are doing great. So keep your eyes peeled for biomaterials, because they are not going anywhere.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like there's some serious innovation happening, obviously. And I'm going to ask a quick question before we dive into more of like the, the physiology and all that sort of stuff that we have a bunch of topics that we're going to continue to cover. But I have this one, and I need to ask it because it kind of goes back to, some things like we've talked about the, pencil thin, fiber of silk, and the 747 and MythBusters thing and all that sort of stuff. The question that I have is, how long does it take to make these types of things? And actually the question before that, in a sense, is right now, I think you mentioned that only silkworms and spiders actually make this, right? So like you go outside and you see a spider web, right? And you get that shit on you and it doesn't come off you, right? And it's a pain. And like it's like that actually should be a testament, I guess, to some of the strength, because it is very strange. I think people overthink that, at least me, when like I run into one of those or whatever. But the point is that is effective. That's it, right? Like a spider web is silk. Am I incorrect in saying that?
No, it's 100% silk.
So that's literally basically what it is. So if you took those and explain to me just that, to kind of like really make this full circle as far as like from a visual perspective. And maybe the MythBusters clip already does that. But the point is, or what I'm trying to get at is, if you take like that and like a spider's, silk thing or whatever, silk thread.
I think I know. You're asking, how do we make silk and bacteria, but it somehow ends up as a fiber that you would see on a tree?
Pretty much, yeah.
That fantastic question. Fantastic question. So it's actually an amazing answer.
Yeah.
Is that when a spider makes silk, there's steps to the process, obviously. Inside that, how spiders have this almost like a really big butt, kind of like the I think there's a name for it with insects, but the anthropod, or I don't know, something. The end of their body is large. What's happening in that part of their body is that they have a series of glands. In the first gland, they secrete silk protein into that gland. The cells lining that gland secrete silk protein into what we call a dope. Funny word, but it's almost like if you had like a water bottle full of just like viscous liquid. That's your silk protein in solution. That's that spider's first gland. That protein then gets pushed down into the next gland where there is a salt exchange. You have things like sodium chloride leaving, and you have things like phosphate ions coming in, salts, natural salts. And then it gets pushed into a further gland where it's put under shear stress, which is basically like if you took like a milkshake and you put it in a funnel. And at the beginning of the funnel, it's real open. And then at the bottom of the funnel, it gets real tight. That's what we call in chemical engineering shear stress. The edges of that milkshake are going to be put under a stress. And all of these factors, the salts, the shear stress, basically make this protein go from a viscous solution to like a dehydrated fiber. And we can actually mimic this in the lab. So when I purify a protein from bacteria, what I get is just like a clear solution of protein. It has protein in it, but you can't see it. But there's various processes to do this. One of the most common is to use alcohol and basically put it in a spinner and you put it into this little syringe. You squeeze it out of the syringe, which means you're putting shear stress on it. And you dump it into like a dish or a petri dish of alcohol. And that alcohol kind of functions in the same way that the salt exchange does in terms of helping to form what we call beta sheet interactions of the protein, which basically make it go from a liquid to a solid. And that is ultimately how you make a actual physical insoluble fiber out of a liquid protein. But it's one of the miracles of nature that spiders are able to do this. It's really fascinating.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So like how, I mean, I guess, again, I don't know what this question sounds like to somebody that does this every day, but like how long would it take to make something like that that's of use in a sense, right? Like you're talking about it, you're talking about the application of like, you know, the proteins themselves and like everything. But if you actually wanted to make some, I mean, there's already things being made, I guess, right? Like, you know, we talked about what's when you transition into that, what's that like? What's the timetable and those types of things?
So the timetable is a great question. And it certainly varies based on what application you're using. But where I'm at with making these proteins recombinantly, making these proteins in bacteria, which, as I've reiterated here, do not naturally make silk proteins. The process of producing, synthesizing, and engineering a silk gene that is ready, that takes a while. It takes probably at least a month or two for somebody that has a lot of knowledge of how to do that. For me, when I was first starting my Ph.D., I had to learn everything. It took me longer than that, right? So let's start at the point where you actually have a silk gene, right? You have a piece of DNA that's going to make a silk protein. From there, it's probably a week to 10 days to get an actual product. So you do an expression that typically takes 1 day. This is where the bacteria are grown and they make the protein. That's day 1. Day 2 would be what we call lysing the cells. We break open these bacterial cells and we harvest the silk protein. Day 3 is purification. So when you break open a bacterial cell, you're getting all types of other proteins, natural proteins that occur in the bacteria. We purify our silk protein from those natural proteins, right? So that's 3 days. After that, you got 1 to 2 days of what we call dialysis. So when we harvest and purify that silk protein from the bacteria, it's not in pure water. It's in a combination of different buffers because of different things we had to do during the purification and lysis. It's in a bunch of different salts, right? But in order to do exact experiments and honestly applications with that silk protein, you have to do 1 to 2 days of what's called dialysis. This is where you take your liquid solution of silk protein and you put it in like a special tube and you put it in water. And it gets rid of all the salts and basically puts your protein from a very salted, impure solution to basically protein in pure water. So we're at 5 days now. Then you do 2 days of what's called freeze drying. So this is actually where things start to become a little bit more like silk, because at this point you have basically a clear solution of silk protein. It looks like a test tube full of water. Maybe it has a little bit of viscosity to it. You put it in the freeze dryer, which is a really, really cold environment that is also a vacuum. And what happens is the water freezes, but the pressure is so low that it sublimates before it turns back into water. So you have this protein now frozen in ice, and the freeze dryer basically gets rid of the ice, but there's no liquid involved. It goes straight to water vapor and gets sucked out. It's if you've ever heard of like the triple point for water and the melting, I think it's the pressure temperature curve for water. That's what I'm talking about here, right? So that's a week. And then what you're left with is something that actually looks like silk. I have pictures of it that I can show you, but it's like this, it looks like white cotton candy. It looks like white cotton candy.
How much are we talking?
Well, depends on the expression, how much you want to make. But generally from a lab size protein expression, we're talking the order of like 100 milligrams. So not a lot, but in terms of a lab scale, that's a lot. You can do a lot with 100 milligrams. You can make a lot of coatings. You can do different types of experiments on it. For lab scale, that's perfect. Obviously, for industrial applications, that's not enough, but that's why you scale up production, right?
Right.
So at the end of that week, you got this like cotton candy looking silk protein thing. It sticks to itself. It's actually very sticky. It's stretchy. It's hard to pull apart. It's honestly kind of hard to work with.
Yeah.
Because it very, very similar to cotton candy. That's about the most similar analogy I can make.
Are you literally at this point right now? I'm trying to again put some visualization. At this point, do you literally have a small pile of like shit literally sitting like in front of silk, literally sitting like right in front of you that basically like if you just like saw a spider web, crumpled it up and put it and were able to put it down. Is that kind of like what you're looking at?
Yeah, except it would be less fibrous than a spider web. So a spider web, it would look kind of like a brain. Like you could see all the fibers just mushed together. Mine isn't, it's more granular than that. It's not quite like that. It's literally like, it looks like cotton candy, right?
Okay.
And so from there, you can basically, once it's freeze dried, once it's in that state, you can do whatever you want with it. And what I've been focusing a lot on have been coatings lately, making different types of coatings. So, you know, as I mentioned, everyone thinks of silk proteins as a fiber, but in reality, you can make a lot of cool things out of silk proteins, one of which is coatings. So you take a tiny amount of that cotton candy freeze dried silk protein and you mix it with, you know, a little bit of water. And you have another solution of silk protein in pure water. And you can put this on pretty much any surface, and it's going to form a very robust coating that has interesting properties, antimicrobial properties, and food preservation properties, other things such as that. I don't want to say too much. Don't want to give away some of what I'm working on right now because it's not published yet. But the coatings are particularly interesting, these proteins. So the same way that these proteins form a fiber, they form a fiber by binding to each other. So if we think about a regular rope, like anyone has seen before, that rope isn't one piece of fabric. That rope is thousands, if not millions of tiny little human hair thin pieces of fabric that are strung together, right? That's what a rope is. That's exactly what silk proteins are when they're in the fiber form, or even when they're in the coating form. They bind to each other and they form this interconnected network, and that's why they're so strong.
What's a regular rope made out of?
Ooh, depends on the rope.
Yeah, well, just give me a yeah. I mean, I don't have many ropes either. Yeah, but like cotton, right?
Yeah.
So, what is cotton? Is cotton comparative to silk in the matter of like the things like, okay, so you could have a cotton rope, right? But you could also have a silk rope. Maybe we don't have too many of those yet, right? But the point is that a cotton rope and a silk rope are analogous in the sense of like they're the same thing, sort of, but the properties are much different.
What makes silk different? Right. So, all right, let's see how I can explain this without getting too confusing. So, at the macro scale, with this theoretical silk rope and cotton rope, we have these individual small fibers that are bound together to make a rope. Now, where the magic happens is actually a level deeper. It's not in the fiber that you can see with the naked eye. It's below that. So what you have in cotton, I believe cotton is, I think it's cellulose, I think. You have long polymer. Cellulose is a long polymer just like silk proteins. But in silk proteins, you have these individual molecular strands that combine with each other in a very specific and very important way. In silk proteins, spider silk, to a certain extent silkworm silk, you have lots of what are called polyalanine runs. Now, this is an amino acid. We are at the level of the primary sequence of the protein. We are at the level of what the ribosome makes inside of the cells. They synthesize this protein that has repetitive polyalanine runs. So it'll be 6 alanines, 10 alanines, and then a bunch of other shit, a lot of glycine, a lot of proline, and then repeat the alanines. At the molecular level, these alanines, they like each other. They like each other a lot.
Yeah.
They don't like water. They don't like salt. They don't like that shit at all. They like each other. And they come together as if you took your two hands and brought them together to clap. Those are the polyalanine sequences coming together, and they form what we call beta sheet crystals. It's a fancy name for, I mean, literally crystals that form among spider silk proteins. And these crystals give spider silk an extreme amount of strength. The other regions of a spider silk protein are very stretchy. Lots of glycine, lots of proline. Those are amino acids, and they can twist and they can stretch, and that's what gives spider silk its elasticity. So the difference between a rope of spider silk and a rope of just cellulose, cotton, a regular old rope, right, is actually at the molecular level. And that is what we try to mimic with our design of recombinant spider silk proteins. We try to mimic the best parts of the molecular design while also making these peptides able to be produced in microorganisms.
Gotcha. Okay. Makes sense. Yeah, I'm trying to draw, again, similarities and things like that because, when you can buy a silk rope, it's probably going to be better than a cotton rope, right? So, you want to make sure.
Well, I don't know if we'll ever be buying silk ropes.
But just in general, yeah.
Just in general.
Something like that.
Just in general. Hopefully one day we can. But I think the applications are actually going to lie in the more unintuitive aspects of silk. Yeah. As I mentioned, coatings, medical things. There's actually a very famous paper where researchers were able to preserve vaccines in silk proteins. So the silk proteins protected the vaccines against temperature. So this is actually really timely because with the COVID vaccines that are coming out, I think it's Pfizer needs to keep their vaccine at negative 80 degrees Celsius. Wow. Now, the only places on Earth that have negative 80 degrees Celsius freezers are the places where I work. It's not very common. But the reason we have them is because the only way to preserve RNA and certain types of cells for that long is at that low temperature. And what these researchers found was that mixing the vaccine, so either some type of deactivated virus or the antigen with the silk proteins, actually allowed them to be preserved at room temperature, which is huge. Because you think about trying to get a COVID vaccine to people in Africa, there are no cold chains in Africa. It's already a difficulty to get that to people in the United States. There's very few negative 80 freezers in the United States. There's none in Africa. I'm sure there's some, but very few. You're not going to get that across the Sahara. And so I think the real innovation of biomaterials is going to come from the unintuitive. Just like some of the innovations with silicon came from the unintuitive. Who would have thought that this element right below carbon was going to be the heart piece of our tech world, So I think that's where a lot of the exciting innovation lies with some of these proteins.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I'm sure that's kind of the natural course of new things, right? Like you have like some idea in mind as you start to develop it and research it more and everything. And then you're like, wow, wait a second, maybe we can adapt this in a certain way and use it in some, facet or application that we didn't initially intend on or something where it's like, oh, that's kind of a cool discovery there. So
Yeah, and that's the beauty of a lot of what I do with my PhD journey here. As I mentioned, very interested in entrepreneurship, trying to start a startup based on my business. And one of the beautiful things about doing that is that it, like you just said, it gives you that perspective of like, well, this is cool what we're working on, but what does this actually mean for the world? What does this actually mean for people? And you don't really learn that until you take more of an entrepreneurial dive into what you're doing. I did a National Science Foundation entrepreneurship program last year, and the coolest part about the program was they literally said to us, we don't give a shit about your tech. We don't care if you can make gold out of dirt. We don't care. Who's going to buy it? Who's going to buy it?
That's a good perspective to at least have, right? Not like the only one, but that's a really good perspective to be.
Who's going to buy it?
Yeah.
And there is so much truth to that. If you can't bring an innovation to market, it means nothing. It means nothing to the world. We live in a free market, capitalistic society, has its downsides, obviously, but also has its upsides. And one of those upsides is that it's really good at determining what innovations matter to us.
Right.
And that's one of my biggest gripes with academia. I spoke earlier for a minute about how there's great things and bad things about academia. One of my biggest gripes is that there needs to be more of a focus on what does this mean. I know brilliant, smartest people I've ever met that are doing amazing work, but they don't necessarily know how to change the world. I'm not claiming I do, but I think that they are so disconnected from this idea of you don't change the world unless you bring something to the people. And a lot of times how you bring that to the people is through the markets. So I would like to see more of that in science in general. People understanding that what they're working on, they should also sometimes view it through the window of how do I bring this to people? How do I bring this to the market? And just in general, as an idealistic goal for my career in biotech, I really view myself as somebody that wants to work towards bringing innovations of biotech to the world, bringing innovations of biotech to the markets, to people. And that's really where I've kind of carved out my path here with this combination of hardcore science, but also entrepreneurialism. And I would like to see more of it.
Yeah,
to see more of it. So
I had a thought earlier, and this is probably a good time because of the topics that we're on right now with the blend of biotech and entrepreneurship and like how that all works, right? So as a context to it, I think a lot of times when you are producing a product or you're marketing a product or you're trying to get something to market, that's not necessarily biotech, right? Somewhere else. Let's just say it's SaaS product, something that you're, like an app or something like that. You're the developer and the business heads of that company are like, hey, when is this going to be done? When is this going to be done? When is this going to be done? Question that I have for you, maybe you haven't had the experience with it just yet because you're moving towards the business application side of and that whole thing of it. But is that a thing? Do you know if that's a thing? And like, I'm assuming it's probably a thing right now with the vaccine, like for instance, right? Like it's like there's probably like business people at Pfizer or all these other companies like, guys, when is this going to get done? And you as a scientist, I would imagine is like, this takes time. You know what I'm saying? Like I don't. That's kind of a very interesting question right now in general. How have we gotten this far with the vaccine this fast? When it doesn't normally, I think it normally takes much longer. So we don't need to talk about that specifically, but just in general, do you know of any of that? Have you ever heard of any of that sort of thing? Once you start to get into the role of, or right now, it sounds like you're like developing it because there's going to be application in the future, but there's no intrinsic, like extreme need for it right now. But like, even if you compare it to the vaccine things, like we need this right now. It's like, that's when science meets business and it's like, oh God, we have to actually hurry up. And it's something that it seems like can't be rushed. Am I wrong to say that, or what's the?
No. Very insightful question. And I love that you bring this up because it's kind of like the constant stereotypical tension in startup world, right? Like, here's my tech, I'm working on it. Here's the VC that's giving you shit, like got to get to market quicker, right? And I'm sure that there is some of that. in my field, in biotech, right? I can't speak for pharmaceuticals. So when I say biotech, I'm talking specifically about biotech outside of pharmaceuticals. But the funny thing is, a lot of what I've experienced so far, I'm not an expert yet, but what I've experienced so far in this world of kind of biotech entrepreneurialism is that the VCs, the investment people, the people running business competitions, they don't know 5% of the tech and the field that you know. Like, you know, you have spent years studying whatever it is that you're studying, whatever it is that you're researching, trying to bring to market. The VCs don't care enough or don't have the time to invest that amount of knowledge. So ironically, they trust you on the tech stuff in a way, to the point that they just want to see the business stuff succeeding.
Right.
I mean, ultimately, that's what their job is to have a business succeed that they invest in. And so, you know, for instance, I was briefly in talks with an incubator earlier this year, and I've talked to some other, you know, CEOs in biotech and whatnot this year, some of my contacts, and it's kind of like this irony that is a little bit pervasive throughout the field that we're in, the work that we're in, where it's like, obviously we need the VCs, we need investors, we need things like that, but it's up to you to show them why they should invest. At the end of the day, they're not going to have the time to look into the science the way that you have looked into, and they need to see results. It seems to me to be very much a results-oriented type of thing. And I can't speak for other industries. I do think that it's probably very different in other industries. I think that in somewhere like software, time to market is so much more of a overbearing thing. You know, I mean, if you miss out on launching your new Flappy Bird app 3 months after somebody launched another version, you're done. With hard tech, it's a lot different. With hard tech, it takes a lot more time to get something to market. And also with hard tech, it's I think there's just a lot bigger of a barrier to entry to understanding what's going on. I'm not saying that software isn't hard. I think software is very hard, but you know, if I came to you and I said, "Oh, I'm going to launch a new Facebook. It does this, this, and this," you'd probably have a good idea of what I'm talking about, because everyone knows Facebook. But if I come to you and I say, "This silk protein can do this, this, and this, and we want to use it for this," there in a way there can be a little bit more of a barrier to entry. So it's there's some interesting nuances in the field, especially when it comes to investors and things like that. But ultimately, it's very much they're going to trust you on the tech, but if you don't back it up with business development, they don't care. They don't care. They don't care how cool, kind of like I said earlier, they don't care how cool your tech is. They don't care if you can make gasoline out of water. If you don't have a way to bring it to market, and if you haven't demonstrated that, they don't give a shit. You know?
Interesting. Yeah, well, you make a good point there, like kind of using software as an analogy. And again, it's not to shit on like software developers. I know plenty. I build websites. I kind of understand that. But there's a lot more people building websites and coding than there are making silk proteins, right? So that's honestly one of the things is that, you know, that illustrates perfectly the barrier of entry. That illustrates the difficulty of what you're trying to do. And then it kind of all ties it back together, meaning like, okay, well, I'm happy to hear that. Truthfully, I'm happy to hear that, because I'm happy to hear that if you had a situation right now where you had like VCs and stuff like that, and you were trying to bring something to market, I'm happy to hear that they kind of let you do you, in a sense, like let you be the person that is actually developing the product. Because I know from personal experience that there's a lot of times where that doesn't happen, especially I'm talking more like software development. That's kind of more, you know, at least one example where I kind of know where you'll have a developer saying, okay, this is going to take 2 months to do. And then like, okay, so you get an initial project, or like, you know, this is what we're going to do. This is the goal, the project that this is going to do this, this, and this, right? And then say, okay, it's going to take 2 months. And they're like, okay. And then halfway through, they start changing shit on you. Can you imagine that?
Yeah.
Can you imagine that you're halfway into this? You're like, oh yeah, we're going to make some silk food coatings that do this, this, and this. Like halfway through, like, you know what, bro, we're going to change this. It's going to be like it's completely different. Let's make it do something else. It's like, that is kind of what I see happen in the software to kind of to compare it to it. And that is where it starts to get difficult, because then now you have somebody that doesn't understand your technology, isn't the expert in your field, telling you to make changes, and then like getting upset, or like, you know, whatever the case may be, right? Just that tension that you were talking about. I'm happy to hear that it's not in the realm of biotech to that extreme, at least in the area that you're in. I'd be interested to hear about pharmaceuticals though. Like I'd be really interested to hear what happened this year with like Pfizer and these people. It's like I don't know. I'm not a
Pharmaceuticals is a different animal, man.
Yeah.
Pharmaceuticals is its whole own thing in biotech. There's so much money, so much influence, lobbying, some of the most powerful, rich corporations in the country. It's a whole different animal. If you look at the other side of biotech, where I'm in, we're very much the scrappy upstarts for the most part. And pharmaceuticals are like the established, most powerful, some of the most richest and powerful companies in the country. So it's this real irony in biotech between pharmaceuticals and the rest of biotech, in my opinion. But I think that with the whole vaccine, the government gave aid to certain companies developing. They gave provisions that if you can develop a vaccine, we'll pre-order X amount of doses. And they also allowed companies to skip phase 3 trials, I believe, which are typically the longest trials for any type of pharmaceutical.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, ultimately, I kind of agree with most of that because, this is crisis by most considerations, and we should try to get something to people that are at risk, right? But it's a different animal, and I really can't speak to it because it's so far from what I do, which is just, again, speaking to the complexity of our world and the fact that even though I consider myself a biological and chemical engineer, I do not feel comfortable for a second talking like I know anything about the pharmaceutical industry. So
it's very interesting. Yeah. And I mean, the one thought that I had on that there, and it kind of like, I don't know, brings everything together there and like kind of is a good example of the point. You have this timeline, right? This is one of the only times I've really known that it's necessary. Like you just said, it's a crisis, right? For the vaccine thing. And I know you're not in the pharma thing, but if we could just like talk as like two people just witnessing a scenario, right? It's, well, okay, that's cool that they have incentives, like they'll pre-order and they can skip the last things. But this is really where, this is like the one time where it seems like money starts to fuck with shit. And what I mean by that is, okay, well, we can provide incentives like, we'll order things and we'll do this. And you have all these companies trying to, go through these trials and go through these experiments to get this vaccine created. And now, I honestly didn't even know that they had those types of incentives. But that puts the idea into my mind, well, it's like, well, we're going to speed up a process to get something to people, but now we're like mixing monetary incentives with people's health. And it's like, well, I don't know. It's just all very strange to me. We don't have to go deep into COVID talk, but you know what I'm saying? It's just like, it's a weird blend of like incentivizing something, but then also it's for public health. But at the same time, it's like not everyone's dying. It's a weird, a weird thing. I don't.
No, I agree completely. It's very weird. You have pretty objectively speaking, you have a need for something like a vaccine, but at the same time, you also have the most quickly produced biologic ever.
Yeah.
And speaking as somebody in the field, as I said earlier, man, biology it's like a game of poker. You never know what you're going to get. You never know how somebody's going to bet, what the river card is going to be. You never know. And I think it's necessary, but it's also, a little sketchy. Like I don't think, I think there's a lot of things, a lot of side effects, a lot of things that can come from a rushed biologic. I think ultimately it's going to do a lot more good than harm.
I hope so. Yeah. I'm all for that.
What I know about mRNA vaccines, I think it's going to be really safe. But at the same time, just my intuition with working in this field is that, personally, I'm not somebody that's at risk. I don't know if that's the best option for me.
Yeah.
But I think that it's great that we are going to have this option for people that are at risk.
Absolutely.
But like you said, not to dive too deep into the COVID talk. I'm sure everyone has
an opinion on this. Everybody's actually a biotech expert when it comes to that. But no, that's interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I hope for the best. Obviously, like you said, I kind of share the same opinion with you.
But the funny thing I think about COVID is I think that it speaks a lot to our health in general. Yes. As a people, as a nation. And I think that I'm not an expert. I'm not going to claim like I am, but what I have heard, what I have read is that you see that there is a pretty strong correlation between severity of infection and things like obesity, things like vitamin D deficiency. A lot of the deaths, if not an overwhelming majority, come from people with comorbidities. I think there needs to be more of a conversation around that stuff. And that's kind of like where my geeky biological engineering, like outside of my work, my main, probably one of my main intellectual hobbies, if not the main intellectual hobby, is just learning about human health, human nutrition, biochemistry, human physiology. I'm very interested in that. I could have very easily gone the med school route with some of this. And I think that there should be more of a conversation around, you know, our own personal health. Like look at the way that this virus is ravaging a lot of people, and that's terrible. And maybe in the future we should take steps as a society to become healthier. And I think that like a lot of that just comes down to nutrition, so much of it. You know, I think that we have been really misled over the past 40, 50 years in terms of being told what we should eat. And I have a lot of non-conventional views on what I think is healthy, what I think we should eat, based on both my own personal experience and the research I've done. You know?
Yeah, I'm excited to talk more about this too, because we were talking about before we went live here on the show, and you know, I know this is a passion of yours. I've done some of this stuff. I don't know where. I'm interested to see where it kind of started, right, with you, and then all the things that you've kind of tried to implement, and then if I know that I've done a couple things like we mentioned before. I'm sure we'll touch on them. But like, what was where did this kind of all start with you? You mentioned already that the weightlifting is a huge thing, so you're into like the physical fitness aspect of it. We talked a little bit about the spiritual aspect, so keeping your mind healthy. You mentioned nutrition. So what's start to, you know, maybe unpack it a little bit?
Yeah. So I guess if people couldn't pick up, I'm very much obsessed with physical, mental health, just being the best me that I can be, fitness, very into that, right? And unfortunately, it started in a bad place. But I guess you could say that's like a lot of things, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And I was pretty athletic in high school. I played some sports. I exercised. I had fun. And in college, the first few years of college, the first 2 or 3, I was kind of like the stereotypical college kid, like party on the weekends, do chest day on Monday, and maybe another lift on Wednesday, and that's it, right? But I started to, around the time I was 20, 21, so about junior year of college, I really started to have some bad anxiety. It was very confusing to me. I didn't even know what it was. You know, when I was first having it, I didn't even know that there was a name for it. And I think that says a lot to how we should evolve as a culture. I think we need to, especially young men, I think we really need to help young men understand some of this a little bit more. It certainly would have helped me, but, you know, it's in the past.
Yeah.
But
well, you seem like you've figured it out. You're on your way. And it's unfortunate that you had to go through it, but of course, things like that harden you. So
it definitely did. Definitely did. It was a huge learning experience for me, and I'm actually. It was great that it happened to me because I'm very much better for it. And it very much is in my past. Yeah. And I feel a lot more comfortable talking about it now than I used to, because it's become a part of what's made me better instead of a part of what's made me worse. Yeah. And so, you know, I had a really rough time of it junior and senior year of college. A lot of anxiety and, you know, not happy to say this, man, but a lot of panic attacks. It was really confusing, really confusing, because my life was fine. For the most part, my life was fine. So I didn't understand where this was coming from or what it was. And I struggled with it a lot through senior year of college, a lot. It was pretty bad, man. It was a bad time. And I got to the end of my senior year of college, and I remember through senior year, I had gotten really into running, because I was always looking for a way to feel better, a way to feel less stressed out, less anxious, a way to not have a panic attack, not feel moody when I got up, right? All this shit. And so I started running pretty much every day, and I got real hardcore with it. This was kind of the start of my hardcore obsession with fitness. Yeah. I was running like 6 miles a day. And it was right after the end of my senior year of college. I actually was watching a podcast, the Joe Rogan podcast. I'm sure nobody's heard of that, but
I've never heard of it.
Never heard of it. And Peter Attia was on.
Yeah,
Peter Attia.
I probably saw that one. I don't know how many times he's been on, but I loved the episode that I saw. It was probably the same one.
Yeah, Peter Attia was on, who to this day is like one of my role models. I would love to be like him someday. Very successful, has a podcast, does his own thing, you know. And he was talking about how he gained a lot of weight in med school, and he went on a ketogenic diet and lost it all immediately and was back to being shredded. And I was running a lot. And in my 21, 22-year-old vanity, I thought, man, how cool would it be if I ran a lot and got as shredded as I could, right?
Yeah.
I was just, I'm still a kid, but back then, of course, I was a kid and I was having fun. And
were you just average at that point, like body type? You mean?
No, I was pretty lean.
Okay.
I was pretty lean. I was probably about 15% body fat, but I didn't have a lot of muscle.
I got you.
I was so I'm about 6'1", 6'2". I was probably about 175 then.
Okay.
And so I said, fuck it, I'll try it.
Yeah.
So I did the ketogenic diet, right? A lot of meat, a lot of fat, butter, no carbs really. Mm-hmm. And I'll never forget this, man. I'll never forget this. It was the weirdest shit that ever happened to me, right?
Yeah.
4 days into the diet, I remember I was visiting my parents who live here in Pittsburgh. I was visiting them, walking around the house, and all of a sudden I just felt like calm. I felt like chill, like good. Like I had just had like 2 drinks and I'm hanging out. I felt good. Mm-hmm. I'm like, I haven't felt this way in years. Like I feel more calm than I have in the past 2 years. Mm-hmm. It was so weird. So that keeps going on for like a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And I'm like, okay, what the shit is going on? Like what is this? Yeah. I had done this diet totally just for experiment. It's fun to experiment. Let's see if I can get lean. Let's see if I can get that chiseled six pack. That like just for the fun of it, right? I had not expected this. So I started doing research because I'm a geek, right? Started doing research. Turns out that I discovered some papers on how ketones actually change the neurotransmitter makeup of your brain. They actually favor they favor the GABA ratio to glutamate ratio in your brain. So GABA is responsible for like toning down your brain. Alcohol is actually a GABA agonist, and glutamate is responsible for kind of like hyping up your brain and bringing it up, right? And I realized I was reading this paper about how a ketogenic diet actually puts the equilibrium in favor of GABA, so it kind of increases the GABA versus glutamate ratio in your brain. I'm like, that's really fucking interesting. I mean, maybe that has something to do with why I feel more calm, why I feel chill, why I don't have as much anxiety. Then I started reading more about how ketones and a ketogenic diet can change your gut bacteria. They can improve the health of your gut lining. They lower inflammation, all this shit, right? And I'm like, wow, maybe there's something really to this. So then this started like a really long journey for me where I started grad school. This was a couple months after starting keto, and I was still on keto. I got really into lifting. I left running, got really into lifting. Was just trying to build as much muscle as possible, was eating keto, was feeling great. And then eventually I just kind of transitioned about a year and a half ago to fully carnivore. For the most part, sometimes I'll have, some plant foods and stuff like that, but fully carnivore for the most part. And I mean, it has done wonders. I mean, I haven't struggled with anxiety in years. Coming from somebody where this was one of the major problems in my life, and I haven't struggled with it in years. And it wasn't scientific. It's an N=1. Maybe that wasn't responsible for it, but I think it was a big part of it. And I think that along this way, I became obsessed with researching this stuff because it had such a profound impact on my life. I became obsessed with researching it. And clearly it wasn't just the exercise, because I had been running daily for like almost a year, and it really didn't change my anxiety much. Really what changed it was the change in diet. I mean, that's the only thing that changed in my life at that time, and it made such a big impact. And I'm at a point now where I realize that the mainstream nutritional advice is complete horseshit. Yeah. Complete horseshit. And the mainstream food supply is poison. Yeah. It's absolute poison. We are living in a society that is fed by seed oils, refined grains, and sugars in a micronutrient depleted environment, and I think it's wrecking fucking havoc on people. I don't think that it's proof. I mean, there are 70% of Americans that are overweight and obese, and I think it's a crime. I think that we need to take a second look at nutrition, take a second look at what we think is good to put in our bodies, because I think almost everything people take as truth is wrong. The idea that you should have what's the recommendation? 50 to 60% of your daily calories from carbs. The idea that you should cut out saturated fat for polyunsaturated fat. The idea that eating cholesterol affects your blood levels of cholesterol. I mean, these are all false, dogmatic, false, and harmful to people. You think about the foods that are most high in cholesterol: eggs, dairy, beef. These are the most nutrient-dense foods on earth for humans. I mean, eggs have literally, I think, almost every essential vitamin and mineral that you need to live. And we're telling people not to eat them because they have cholesterol. When in reality, 85% of the cholesterol that your body has is synthesized by your liver. Only a small amount of it comes from the gastrointestinal tract into the bloodstream. There's a lot of avenues that we can go down here to explore, but back to your question, what started this journey for me was not a good thing. I was in a really bad place. And I just got some relief from changing my diet, from looking into it. And ultimately, it has taken me to a place of health where I didn't think was achievable. My energy levels are insanely high. The way I feel on a day-to-day basis, never have symptoms of anxiety, depression, almost never. I mean, I live a stressful life of like research, starting a business, trying to exercise every day. I live a pretty stressful life and it almost never gets to me. And that is night and day from where I was 4 or 5 years ago. And I think that even somebody that doesn't struggle with anxiety, they can still benefit from just having more energy, from losing weight. You know, I had a friend in grad school that was about 270 when I met him. And I got him on a version of the ketogenic diet. In 3 or 4 months, he was down to 210, 200 in 3 or 4 months. You know, I mean, this changes people's lives. Nutrition is the foundation of your life, the foundation of almost every waking moment you feel. And not enough people realize that. And I think what's even shittier is like, a lot of people think they're doing the right thing, man. They get their brown rice and their vegan cheese and their low-fat chicken breast, and they think they're doing it right. I mean, of course that can work for some people.
Right.
I think for a lot of people, though, dude, it's fucking them up.
Yeah.
Because it was fucking me up.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a deep topic. I like this. There's a lot here. So, and like you said, there's a lot of avenues to go. So I'm going to try to just let me give like a little bit of like what I know to kind of so again more context here. So the first thing was interesting carnivore diet. I had no idea that you were like mostly on carnivore. Jordan Peterson has some I don't know if you know we could touch on that a little bit. I think he did it for a little bit different reasons. I know like his daughter Michaela was having real bad like arthritis and stuff like that, and like psoriasis. I know he had psoriasis and all sorts of shit, which is interesting because I've had moderate psoriasis just on like my joints. Had it way worse when I was younger, and it's always been like it's like an autoimmune like skin disease thing. And I don't know what has happened to me, but I think that I might have also benefited from a little bit of paradigm shift, like kind of like you're talking about over the years. And I didn't really notice it at the time. As a backstory, probably people have heard this before, especially on AM and the PM because we talk about food way too much. But Amanda and I love food. We go out to eat all the time and stuff like that. But I used to only eat literally like chicken and fries, like chicken tenders and fries when I was younger. I was a fat kid. It was really bad. And then one day it just kind of clicked sometime early high school time. I started eating some grilled chicken and broccoli, what everybody says to eat, right? Which is we'll say better than chicken and fries, but maybe not like, optimal,
it's
right?
Certainly a few steps above.
Yeah. So I was making some progress there. Started literally out here in this studio, whatever. Started like deadlifting, just moving some weights and stuff like that, and got like closer to where I am now, which isn't where I would like to be, but better, right? Just progress, right? But the point that I was making with the diet and the transition, how it actually affects things about you, is I feel like I definitely have benefited from the psoriasis thing and maybe a couple other things. Obviously, you just feel better. You have more energy. You're more of like a lively person when you're not putting absolute trash down your throat every day. But that's all super interesting to me, and I haven't done enough research to the point that you have. But I have a lot of like practical questions and then sort of your mindset questions. So the first one is like stupid, straightforward. Like you mentioned earlier, roast beef and milk for lunch, and you said steaks for dinner and stuff like that. Is that basically at the point that you're at now? I would love to try carnivore. I know that I could eat chicken all the time because that's pretty much all I eat now, like a lot of that. But like, is that what's your basically what's your diet, and like what do you like, do you literally like not go out to eat? Like what's the extra stuff there? I know that the reason you're eating like beef and stuff is so you're getting like a lot of nutrition, you're getting the protein, but you're also getting like fats and stuff like that that continue to fats and salts here and there. But what's that kind of look like? What's a day-to-day, week-to-week type thing?
So I'll go through like what I eat and why.
Okay.
I'll go through what I eat and why, because that'll be a good segue into answering a lot of questions people have, and also just kind of diving into some of these topics. But first off, I'm not dogmatic, man. If somebody's on a vegan diet and they love it, they're feeling good, they're doing great, their health markers are good, go for it, man. Go for it. I think that we are so far from understanding human nutrition that we're kind of in a no man's land, and you just got to learn what you can and do what feels right for you, right? Personally, I think that a highly animal-based diet is quite optimal for humans. But that's just my personal view based on the research and personal experience that I have. So my typical day is I usually don't eat in the morning. I like to fast. So I'll get up, I'll have a little bit of caffeine, and I'll hit the gym. I'll do my weights, strength training. And I usually get up around 5:36. And then usually about between 10 and 12 is when I have my first meal. Not because I force that, just because that's when I get hungry. I'm not typically hungry before that. And I'm usually at work at this time. So I'll have about anywhere from half a pound to a pound of beef. Sometimes roast beef, sometimes like leftover steak from the last day. I like to get fattier cuts because it's more satisfying, and I don't eat a whole lot of carbs, so I do need the fat for energy. And I'm in kind of a bulking phase right now, so I'm trying to put on muscle. So I do drink a lot of milk because it's a great way to get calories and a little bit of carbs, and also just protein, fat, micronutrients.
What kind of milk? Just out of curiosity, is it like whole milk or?
Just regular whole milk, man. Gotcha. Just regular whole milk. Nothing special. Sometimes I do like the grass-fed stuff if I go to like the fancy food store, but if I'm in a bind, I'll just stop at the regular grocery store, get some milk. And then, honestly, I'm usually good from then until dinner, which is usually around 6 or 7. I usually have dinner. And I'd say about 2, 3, 4 nights out of the week, it's steak. I'm a huge fan of nice fatty steak. There's just no other food that I find is satisfying.
Like a sirloin or?
Oh, no, too lean, man.
Too lean?
Stripper ribeye.
Okay.
Stripper ribeye is typically what I go for. I'm lucky enough to get some good prices up here in Albany. Outside of that, I'll have like maybe fish once a week. I have, pork maybe once or twice a week, chicken maybe once a week. But I mean, my diet is 70 to 80% beef and dairy. I eat a lot of, I like to put a lot of, like almost like sour cream. It's called crème fraîche, I think how you say it. It's like a French sour cream. I put a lot of, it's basically just pure fat. I put a lot of that on my steaks. I'm getting hungry now talking about this. But yeah, and the reason for this is that first off, I feel great on it. I feel really good. And I just, if you look up the nutrient content of beef and dairy and beef fat and eggs, I eat a lot of eggs too. I mean, I'm hitting all the bases. And I'm not getting any bullshit. These are all whole foods that I'm eating. Milk is a whole food, technically. Yeah. Beef is a whole food. Eggs are a whole food. I'm eating real food. I'm getting all of this nutritional value, and I feel great. And on top of that, to get more granular, to get more scientific, I really think that processed food, seed oils, refined grains, and sugars are the death of us. Are the fucking death of us. And I stay away from those to a T. The only processed food I eat is they're like pemmican bars from a company called Epic. It's basically like pork, egg yolk, and a little bit of maple sugar. Like 4 grams, 5 grams of maple sugar. Those are the only processed things I eat. Everything else from there is just whole foods. And I don't know where to go with this from here, but in like a cut of steak, in the meat you have B12, you have magnesium, you have a ton of water soluble vitamins. In the fat, you have fat soluble vitamins. In dairy, you have vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin K, especially if it's grass fed, you got a lot of vitamin K. In eggs, you have all this shit. Like, it's overwhelming the amount of nutrition we can get from these foods. And to me, it's a crime that they've been demonized. I don't believe that eating cholesterol has that big of an impact on your blood cholesterol. Moreover, I don't believe that having high cholesterol necessarily means that you're going to get heart disease. That hypothesis ignores the mechanism of which the glycocalyx gets damaged inside of the arteries, and you have malformed LDL particles, oxidized LDL particles, glycated LDL particles, which work their way into the epithelial lining of the artery, where a macrophage attacks them and forms the plaque. This is a complex mechanism by how many of these chronic diseases start. And this idea that we can whittle it down to fucking cholesterol is ridiculous when you actually take a look at some of these mechanisms. I believe in the context of a low inflammatory, high nutrient density, low insulin spiking diet, that you shouldn't really need to be worried about your LDL in the, at least as long as you have good trigs and HDL, things like that. That's a very specific example, but that's kind of where I'm coming at from with this stuff is like a lot of people will sit down to have a meal and they'll be like, I got my chicken breast, my low fat chicken breast. I got my brown rice. I got my broccoli. I got my squash. I got my, sesame oil that I'm going to dip everything in. This is a healthy meal. When in reality, I would say that, first off, the only thing with nutrient value on your plate is that chicken breast. Like the brown rice, some of those veggies, it's a myth that fruits and vegetables are nutrient dense. They're not. Most of the nutrients in fruits and vegetables aren't even bioavailable for us to absorb. Beta carotene in carrots, that's not even vitamin A. In fact, most people don't have a whole lot of the enzyme that can convert beta carotene from sweet potatoes and carrots into retinol, which is the actual vitamin A that we use. Whereas retinol is found in egg yolks and dairy in its pure form, in its usable form for humans. So things like that, there's just a lot of inconsistencies, and I think people are really being led astray. People will say, I don't want butter, give me some soybean oil instead, or maybe that's not a good example, but they substitute things like butter and beef tallow for vegetable oils, which I think is one of the worst things that we do. McDonald's used to fry their fries in beef tallow, which is about 4% polyunsaturated fats, right? Now they fry their fries in vegetable oil. I think it's soybean or corn, some mixture, but it's like 50% polyunsaturated fat. Polyunsaturated fat literally goes into your mitochondria and signals within the electron transport chain in a very unique way, in a way that causes your fat tissue to actually become more responsive to storing energy. Polyunsaturated fats literally make you fatter. Saturated fats literally do the opposite to your mitochondria. It has something to do with what's called the FAD to NADH ratio. And saturated fats, because they have no unsaturated bonds, actually produce an excess of they produce an excess of reactive oxygen species, and they alter the FADH to NADH ratio in a specific way that causes your fat tissue to become resistant to storing energy, which means that you maintain leanness. And these are basic aspects of biochemistry that have gotten lost in this wave of bullshit nutritional recommendations. Not the least of which have been pushed forth by companies trying to sell us the cheapest, most profitable bullshit they can, filled with sugar, refined grains, and seed oils. So I'm going to get off my soapbox here.
Well, you make a convincing argument. I mean, there's a lot of good points in there that, like, when you lay them out like that, it makes a lot of sense. And honestly, I haven't done as much research as you have, but I've listened to, like, Joe Rogan. I've listened to Jordan Peterson on the topics. He's not a nutritionist necessarily, but he's done the research. He's implemented some of that stuff. It seems like he's gotten positive effects. I think even, like you said, Peter Attia, kind of like the keto type side of it. So I've listened to a decent amount of people, all different, channels of media or whatever. it seems convincing. It seems like a good argument, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, and if you think about it, there is so much bullshit out there. It doesn't matter, who you're hearing it from, this plate thing, the food pyramid type stuff, all that stuff. There's maybe some things here and there, but you're absolutely right in the sense of, I think we are all starting to at least get like this hint that grain and just like you said, refined sugars and stuff like that, they're not good sources of energy. Insulin spikes are not good, all that sort of stuff. I want to play with that in mind, right? Because I think you've done a good job of laying that out there. And like I'm sitting here, right? And my diet basically consists of those types of things: chicken, rice. I do eat steak and stuff like that, but that's a big portion of it. It's like chicken, rice, and vegetables. We'll say I do eat bullshit. I'm not gonna lie. I eat a lot of Chipotle. I eat a lot of
Chipotle's not that bad,
Chick-fil-A,
as
like
far as
other
bullshit
shit like
goes.
that. But let me play devil's advocate here from a sense of somebody that you're telling this to, right? Let's say you're telling this to like an audience of people or something like that, and you're pleading your case, and this is gonna fuse like actual health with like discipline and actually wanting to change your life. The question that brought this to mind, this example, is you mentioned earlier that you go home and you and your girlfriend you'll like cook some steaks up for yourself, for each other, right? How the first thing that came to my mind when you said all this is like, fuck, I'd like to try this. But what am I going to do? Like from a real world perspective, right? Me and Amanda, we go out to eat all the time. Like the other day we went to Chick-fil-A, we got all this shit. We go to, like we said, Chipotle, we go to these different places. We like good food, like good tasting food. I don't really like that approach though, because me as somebody who likes to optimize a lot of pieces of my life, I know that's not the best thing, right? Have you found anything from an applicable perspective on how you take this knowledge and actually build it into your life when it's more than just you? You know does that make sense?
Yeah,
Like how
yeah.
how have you been able to like,
So
have you
like
done
you're
this in your
talking
relationship?
like going out with people, going to family
Yeah,
dinner.
and in your relationship too. We don't need to like super dive into it necessarily, but I'm saying like this is
Yeah.
the theory. Again, how do we actually bring this into practice?
So I'm lucky. My girlfriend Janice, I'm lucky because she is very much enjoying the mostly steak and beef diet.
Yeah,
She loves it. So I'm very lucky. There's no tension there.
Right.
We basically eat the same food. When it comes to family stuff, when it comes to going out, maybe like a group outing with the people you work with, whatever, it gets a little bit more tricky. And this is one part where I will admit this is a tough part for people.
Yeah.
A tough part for people adhering to a strict diet is this type of stuff. And this is where I say, like you do you. If you eat clean 6 days out of the week, have at it one day of the week. If it doesn't screw you up too much, if you don't get real anxiety or feel bloated and have digestive issues, because that was another issue for me. I had severe digestive issues that all cleared up with the carnivore diet. If you don't have that from one day of cheat, do it, man. Do it. It's life. Just live life, right? You're right 6 out of 7 days. But for me, I'm kind of a weirdo, I guess. I just don't give into the social pressure, man. If I go out to a restaurant and they don't have steak, I'll just say, "Oh, get me a burger with nothing on it, just the meat." I don't care, because to me it's not worth it. Like I've had cheat days. Obviously, I'm human. I've had cheat days. I've had days like I think it was 3 weeks ago. I went out, had fun with my friends, was a little hungover. The next day, I got Chipotle, right? I got the works, dude. Rice, guacamole. Like the first time I've had these foods in like a year.
Yeah.
And it was great, but I mean, my digestion was messed up for 2 days. I felt like real tired the next day. It just, for me, I don't feel optimal when I do that, and I really feel it. And it's not worth it. I'd rather just be weird for 10 seconds and order only meat at a restaurant than feel that,
Yeah.
And, it's funny, though, that you bring up Jordan Peterson and even your own experience with psoriasis, because I think one of the most striking things about this whole movement towards embracing animal foods in the diet, and this whole movement towards realizing that plant foods aren't the panacea of health, which they aren't, is autoimmune conditions. We have more autoimmune conditions than we have ever had as a country, as a society that we know of. And some of the results that people are getting with moving towards an exclusively animal-based or mostly animal-based diets are amazing. I mean, Jordan Peterson and his daughter cleared up their autoimmune conditions. Joe Rogan's vitiligo was going away when he was carnivore. I myself, there's certain people that think that anxiety and mental health plays a role with autoimmune conditions. That went away for me. Really fascinating stuff is happening. And I think it goes back to the gut. Another thing that people don't realize about an animal-based diet, or what I basically eat 99% meat and fat and eggs and milk and dairy. What people don't realize about that is that I used to have chronic constipation, as weird as that is to say. I would take a shit like twice a week, as funny as that is.
Interesting.
Like twice a week. Yeah, it sucked. Completely gone. I go like twice a day now.
Yeah.
Completely gone. I followed all the guidelines, man.
Yeah.
I upped my fiber. I ate more fruits and veggies. None of it helped. I just felt more bloated. Cut it all out. Went straight for the meat. There was certainly an adjustment period of a few months, but after that, it's night and day. And where I'm going with this is that a lot of autoimmune disease, I believe, starts in the gut. So what you have in the gut is a very sensitive layer of cells, epithelial cells, right? I used that word earlier when I was talking about arteries and heart disease. It's the same type of thing, right? It's a certain specific layer of cells on the part of your organs that face the world, right? And it's in blood vessels, intestines, and you have these epithelial cells in the gut. And it's only I believe it's only one layer of cells thick. It's very small. And they are held together by these junctions that keep them together next to each other, adjacent to each other. But if they start to come apart a little bit, you get a break in that junction. And food particles from the digestive system can find their way into those junctions and ultimately find their way into your system. And this is a problem because food particles are foreign substances in your body. What a lot of people don't realize is that from your lips to your butthole is actually not part of your body. That's all external. Your digestive system is completely external and for a reason. The food we eat are foreign proteins, foreign carbohydrates, lipopolysaccharide on bacteria that's in your food, whatever it is. These aren't chemicals that are supposed to make their way into your bloodstream. But by having disrupted junctions in your small and large intestine, they can. And this can cause a systematic immune response. Just in the same way, if you had a virus, which is responding to the spike proteins on the virus, you can have the same phenomena happen with food particles that break through that junction. Now, here's where it gets interesting. What causes that junction to break?
I don't know.
Plant toxins.
Plant toxins. Fucking plants.
Gluten. Lectins from certain peppers and spicy foods. Lectins, which are in spicy foods, and other, technically gluten is a lectin, have been shown to disrupt the junctions in the gut. In fact, there was a study done, I believe, in the Netherlands, where they took two populations of people. One population had their vagus nerve severed, which is a nerve that goes from the colon to the brain. The other population had a normal vagus nerve. The population that had their vagus nerve severed had lower rates of Parkinson's disease. So the gut is inexplicably connected, but that's not a good word to use. The gut is inherently connected to the brain in terms of what we eat affects our systematic immune response in our body, our levels of inflammation, and it can even affect our neurotransmitter balance through what we eat. And one of those mechanisms is through the gut junction and leaky gut. So a lot of people, do you ever notice a lot of people with autoimmune diseases are very thin? Poor nutrient absorption. They have, you can look this up. For celiac disease, which is an autoimmune condition to gluten, the villi of their intestines actually become so damaged that they shrink. It's normally these little fingers that hang out in the intestines and they absorb nutrients with all their surface area. But they become so damaged by gluten that they shrink and you have poor nutrient absorption among a severe celiac patient. So we're going around as a society and we're telling people that to be healthy, you should eat whole grain bread with your fake butter spread over it and egg whites, when in reality, what you should be eating is the egg yolk the whole egg, because most of the nutrients are in the yolk. The cholesterol isn't going to hurt you. The real butter. And instead of that slice of bread, have some avocado or have some sourdough bread, which has been fermented. You know, that's another aspect here. A lot of these plant foods that we eat, our ancestors did not eat them that way. You ever heard of kimchi? You ever heard of sourdough bread? Our ancestors were smart enough to take these foods and ferment them because they understood the gluten. They understood that some of the aspects of cabbage aren't the best for you. And then if you ferment them and allow the bacteria to break down some of these proteins, it's a lot easier to digest and it's a lot easier on the body. Celiacs can actually tolerate sourdough bread pretty well because the fermentation has broken down the gluten. And the reason that celiac disease is less common in Europe is because they still, for the most part, use a more traditional fermentation process where they allow the yeast to actually like ferment the mixture and to break down some of these proteins and some of these glutens. And as a result, you have a lower incidence of that disease in Europe, whereas in America, because we're very focused on profit and production with our food, we skip that process with the yeast in our traditional bread making. So you have a whole different type of unmodified gluten in a lot of our bread here. I could be getting some of this wrong. Mm-hmm. Please don't hold me to a T. I'm really talking off the cuff here, mm-hmm. but that's generally the gist of it. And I really think that if you would have told me 3 years ago that I would be eating basically just beef, milk, eggs, and other meats and nothing else, I would have told you you're crazy. Mm. And then here I am in the best shape of my life, feeling great, doing a lot of different things. My digestion is better than I ever thought it could be because that was such a problem for me. My anxiety's gone. And I would have thought you're crazy. But then I ended up doing the research and falling into this. And I just want more people to hear about it because I think it can really change some lives.
You know what's interesting? I haven't heard of many people talk about the carnivore diet, but I've never heard anybody say anything bad. Have you ever heard anybody say anything bad?
So I think the worst part of the carnivore diet is the first month or two.
I have heard that, but I meant like in general, long term, and because that was my actual follow up question was long term over the course of being on the carnivore diet. I've never heard of anything bad. The worst I've heard is, like you said, Joe Rogan said like terrible shits for like the first like 2 weeks, month, and there's probably a lot more stuff like that when your body is like acclimating to it. So, I mean, if you want to explain that, my follow-up question was like, if I said tomorrow, like, okay, I want to start the carnivore diet, like what would you say to be expecting and what would you say to do?
Yeah.
Like,
so, yeah, usually the first month is the worst. A lot of people get diarrhea because they're so used to having fiber that their system is just shocked not to have it. What I will say about that is that I had that as well for about a month or two. But after that, it was pretty incredible how my digestion changed. Like I mentioned, man, this is kind of embarrassing to admit, but between the ages of like 16 and 21, I really struggled with my digestion. Mm-hmm. When I was especially in high school before I even knew anything how to help it, I would go like twice a week. And I would feel bloated all the time and just literally I would feel constipated all the time. It was terrible. It sucked.
Did you ever take like Miralax and shit?
Yeah, dude, I tried the fiber. I tried everything. It just I never felt right.
Yeah.
I never felt right. And so doing the keto helped a lot, actually. Keto helped a lot. Mm-hmm. But I still wasn't like 100% there. Mm-hmm. And then ultimately carnivore is what really just fixed it. So that's what I'll say about, like, if you were going to start today, just know that might happen and you might have to wait it out. And I also want to preface this by saying, like, dude, this is kind of an extreme diet. Like, I'm not recommending anybody do this unless they want to experiment or unless they have a problem they're trying to fix. If you have a mental health problem that won't go away, if you have a digestive problem that won't go away, an autoimmune condition that won't go away, if you're suffering from chronic fatigue, things like that, just try it. Because maybe it's not all the animal products that will fix you, but certainly eliminating all the bullshit can help. And so I'd also say, if you wanted to try it, it's going to take some time to find what works for you, in a sense that, like, some people they don't want to eat steak every day. They don't tolerate dairy. Some people aren't good with the casein and whey proteins that are in dairy. They have a response to that. So that's fine. I would say just try to find what works for you. And I think a good place to start could even be the vertical diet by Stan Efferding, because a lot of people, when they go carnivore, if they can't tolerate dairy, they have a really hard time getting enough fat. And that's not good in the long term. You will get rabbit starvation if you're only eating sirloin steaks with not enough fat, unless you're overweight or obese. In that case, you can go longer, you'll lose a lot of weight. But if you're already a healthy weight, please eat enough fat. Please eat enough energy calories, because protein isn't really used for energy by our bodies, not preferably. You really need to get some fat on the carnivore diet, a lot of fat, and carbohydrates if you can't get enough fat. Please eat enough energy. A lot of people feel like shit because they don't get enough fat or energy calories from fat or carbs. So that would be the first thing. The second thing would be just listen to your body. Just give it time. I'd recommend just starting with mostly beef and beef fat. I believe those are the healthiest meats and fats to consume, especially because beef fat is so low in polyunsaturated fat, and the beef meat, I believe, has the best nutrients, the most B12, things like that. Have some eggs. Eggs are a great source of fat. And like I said, really try to incorporate some butter if you can tolerate it. It's actually really cheap to get beef fat. If you cook it in an air fryer or if you slow cook it, it tastes a lot better. So things like that, and just find what works for you. It does take some getting used to, but one of the funniest parts about it is that I almost never crave the foods I used to eat. I mean, I had that Chipotle a couple weeks ago, but outside of that, I can probably count on one hand in the past year how many times I've deviated from the diet. One hand. I can actually count on one hand how many times I've deviated. And that's not because I have some type of willpower. That's because one of the best parts about this diet is that if you eat a fatty steak with a slab of butter on it and a glass of milk or some cheese and a couple eggs, you will feel the most satisfied you have ever felt for like 6-8 hours.
Yeah.
Like you don't have any urge to go buy that Milky Way or that bag of Doritos. You're just happy. And I think that true nutrition, that true satiation is really something to speak about. You know, I talked a lot about refined grains, sugar, and polyunsaturated, but I think another thing that's a huge problem in our food supply system is micronutrient depletion. I mean, you look at the processed food that most people are eating, and there is nothing in there. There are no micronutrients in that. It's just calories. It's empty calories. That phrase gets thrown around a lot, but it's true. And then you look at a food like, if you were to eat 6 eggs and a steak, I mean, you are getting enough nutrients to power a coal mine, man. Like you are, you're getting, and there's a lot of logic to go into the idea that contributes to satiation. So,
do you take any vitamins?
With the advent of COVID, I do take the occasional vitamin C. I do take it if I ever am out having some fun and I have some alcohol. Because I do drink liquor and sometimes seltzers. Alcohol is not necessarily off limits on the carnivore diet, but like I said, I'm not dogmatic. There's some days where I'll throw some seasoning on my meats. There's some days where I'll have a scoop of potatoes. Well, actually, that's not true. I don't do that very often. But I'm not dogmatic, you know? Like maybe every once in a while, once every 2 months, I'll have a scoop of guacamole with my steak, you know? Not dogmatic, but I do drink sometimes. So sometimes when that happens, it is inflammatory. So I take some vitamin C just to be on the safe side. With COVID, I occasionally take some vitamin C just to be on the safe side. But other than that, I take some creatine, which I don't even think I need because I eat so much meat, which already has creatine in it. But no, I don't supplement with anything. I've been basically exclusively carnivore since May of 2019. And, dude, it's kind of funny. Like I feel just as good as I've ever felt, if not better. And I don't really supplement at all. I do focus on quality. I do really try to buy quality eggs, especially when I have the opportunity to buy some cheaper grass-fed meat, I will. But typically I go for store-bought beef. I actually don't think the difference between store-bought and grass-fed is that big. I do tend to buy higher quality dairy if I can. Pork is a big one for me. Pork and chicken, I don't eat those nearly as much as I do beef, but when I do, I really focus on quality. So pork and chicken are interesting. I don't worry as much about store-bought beef because cattle are what we call ruminants, and they have a very extensive gut. They have this huge, what's called a rumen, where there's these trillions and trillions and trillions of bacteria that ferment whatever they eat and turn it into the actual nutrients that the cow uses. A lot of people don't know this, but cows, gorillas, a lot of animals are actually in ketosis despite the fact that they eat grass. And the reason is that all the bacteria in their gut break down that cellulose into things like butyric acid, which are a ketone, right? Or not a ketone, but close to it, fatty acid.
Mm-hmm.
And so rumen, you can feed ruminants a lot of shit and still get good meat, if that makes sense. Chicken and pork are monogastric, just like humans are. They don't have a rumen like the ruminants do. Mm-hmm. And in the United States, it's unfortunate, but chicken and pork are fed absurd amounts of soy, corn, and other runoff. And what happens is that the flesh of those animals literally becomes enriched with very bad things, such as linoleic acid and whatever else is in what they're feeding them. There's not really that buffer like there are with ruminants. So when I buy chicken and pork, I tend to focus, and the same with eggs, I tend to focus a lot more on the quality. I like to go to the farmer's market for those meats. I try to stay away from store-bought pork. I like to buy low PUFA, low polyunsaturated pork from the piggery in New York because I believe polyunsaturated fats and their overconsumption is one of the leading causes of obesity and chronic disease in the country.
I tend to agree with you there. I've definitely heard the thing about chickens, and I guess pigs obviously too, pork and stuff like that. You got to be careful, because I didn't know the extent of it, but that makes sense the way that you described it. So, I have this other thing. So, we've talked before, obviously, and I mentioned the diet earlier. I don't drink. I never have, just as a personal decision, so I don't really have to worry about that. But I'm asking selfish questions because I want to know, your, what you do, so I can maybe, honest to God, I'm gonna probably end up trying to get Amanda on this when we have an opportunity to, because she has she's struggled with some of the things that you're talking about, like the digestion and the constipation and stuff like that. And sorry, Amanda, but anyway, but and then the psoriasis thing for me, and those types of either autoimmune or just weird problems that you can't shake. You need to. I feel
everybody has them.
I feel like you need to just throw something in there, and just to switch it up. So I definitely want to continue to get more details and kind of dive into your experience, because again, I've heard of other people's, but this is really interesting. Just question, I mostly drink water, and milk and stuff like that. Do you ever really the question is occasionally I'll have a vitamin water zero. Is there bad, do you think there's pretty much bad shit in everything other than water and milk as far as liquids are concerned?
No. So I drink pretty much exclusively water and sparkling water. Mm-hmm. I do, like I mentioned, I drink seltzers or liquor whenever I want to have a drink. Right. I find that alcohol does bother me in terms of, for me, it's my nose. I have a very sensitive nose. So when I drink alcohol, I feel like it's harder for me to breathe through my nose. I feel stuffy nose, and it's directly related to the fact that alcohol actually inhibits an enzyme called, I think it's DOA, and it's the enzyme that breaks down.
There's a reason for everything.
And it breaks down. I'll geek out on this reason. This DOA, DAO or DOA, I can't remember. It breaks down histamine, which is essentially the component that you respond to when you have allergies, and alcohol inhibits that enzyme. So that's kind of the direct correlation there. Other than that, though, I don't have a huge problem with alcohol, so I do have it sometimes with my friends. But in terms of drinking, basically just water, sparkling water. I don't screw around really with anything else. Maybe once, twice a month, I'll have a diet soda because I'm just craving a little bit of caffeine, a little bit of bubbly. Milk, for obvious reasons, like I've talked about. Some people do coffee and tea. I don't think those are too harmful. I like to stay away from coffee. I find that I prefer my caffeine through a pill. I like to be able to dose the amount of caffeine I have every morning. I don't like to go above 150 milligrams because it starts to make me feel quite on edge. I'm a very high energy guy as it is. And I noticed that when I have more caffeine than that, I just feel really I feel kind of stressed and on edge. So I like to really know how much caffeine is going in my body. So that's why I stay away from coffee. Tea, Well, the thing about coffee too is it is very high in oxalates, which some people have a problem with. It's a very small molecule. It forms crystals. It's responsible for kidney stones sometimes. Some people have a real problem with it. A lot of it's in spinach as well. And tea is great. I have tea every once in a while, but it's not regular for me because it just, I don't know. There's no real reason. And also it's very high in tannins, which are digestive inhibitors.
Yeah.
So tannins are real interesting. You actually see certain ruminants like horses have, I believe they have a certain genetic ability to break down or to counteract the action of tannins in the plants that they eat, because tannins can actually prevent you from absorbing the nutrients in a food. This is actually really interesting about certain foods that are touted as healthy. I think like phytic acid, for instance, in a lot of nuts. I believe it's in almonds. You know, almonds are touted as this really healthy food. And I'm sure for most people, they're not really doing them any harm. For some people, they might be. I mean, some people can die if they eat almonds. Is it that much of a stretch to believe that if some people eat almonds, they have digestive issues? I don't think so. Yeah. But regardless, foods like almonds, I mean, you're looking at the seed of a plant. That's what a nut is. It's a seed. It's the most highly protected part of a plant, evolutionarily speaking. I mean, they are going to put all the anti-nutrients they can into that seed to protect their babies. And you have things like phytic acid, which literally leach minerals from your digestive system. A good example of this is spinach. Spinach is high in iron, right? You've heard that,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
No, it's not.
No, it's not.
No, it's not. No, it's not. All of the iron is bound up in oxalate crystals. And so you don't absorb any of it. It's a chelating ion. So it chelates the iron. It's a chelating agent, going back to chemistry class. So you don't absorb any of it. You know, there's an amazing study, I should have brought it with me, that shows, I believe it was black beans, tortillas, and oysters. All right? Yeah. Bear with me here. Yeah. Bear with me. So oysters are extremely high in zinc, which is vital for immunity, aka COVID, mental health, male sexual health. Zinc is very vital. They gave participants in the experiment oysters. Their zinc levels shot up after the oysters, right? Great. Absorbing that zinc. Then they gave them oysters in the black beans and flour tortilla. So they had like a tortilla. It was like an oyster taco, kind of gross, but whatever.
Yeah.
Now, black beans and flour from wheat are both very high in some of these anti-nutrients that are chelating agents that bind to minerals. They gave participants, these black beans, flour tortillas, and oysters, their zinc levels went down. Down. So you think you're eating a healthy meal, you're leaching minerals from your system. That doesn't prove anything. It's one study. But what it means is that there's more to this story here than some of this narrative that's being pushed. And I myself am particularly passionate about it because I have seen the impact in my own life. I have seen the night and day difference when I'm eating steak every day and pretty much only steak and eggs versus when I was eating a regular diet with processed food, gluten-free cookies, rice, whatever it is, right? Just eating that shit. Night and day, man. Night and day. So
yeah.
Sorry, that was a very long answer to your question.
No, it was a good one. And yeah, I don't know how to. It's one of those problems where I feel like there's a lot of problems that have been solved over time, right? Like maybe like our grandparents might have seen something and now it's kind of solved where we're at now. You know, there's just more light. Cigarettes. It's a great one. Yeah. Right? Yeah. It's a great one. Oh, this is great for you. No, it's not.
4 out of 5 doctors smoke.
It's fucking killing you, right? So I hope that these are some of the problems that could get rectified as we have kids, as like our kids have kids, those types of things, and we can, like, you know, people like yourself and just like spreading this information that is like realizing that, you know, hey, can we at least be a little skeptical of like what is kind of being said here and like look at how other people, you know, such as yourself, Jordan Peters, like these people that are actually going out there and experimenting with the fuck. I want to try it, like I said, now, because I think that it could have some healthy benefits on, you know, myself, Amanda, and just other people in my life. So I'm definitely going to preach that there. One other question I had, it was actually related to like, you know, like the liquid portion of diet. I just like water, so I just drink water most of the time. And it actually goes back to when I made that sort of switch to like grilled chicken and all that sort of type of thing going on. I just decided, you know, I was drinking a lot of pop. Like every time I go to a restaurant or every time like I'd have a meal, I'd just have Pepsi or Coke. And I was like, you know, this is just dumb. Let me just drink some water. So I started drinking water. and I've never drank coffee either. So that's like, if I look at my overall nutrition now, I don't really get any caffeine. So is there any like, from your scientific perspective and like how caffeine affects the body, do you think that is there any reason to add caffeine? You know what I'm saying? Like, if
No.
people have a lot of caffeine, should they maybe they should cut down? Maybe there's a certain level. Is there any reason to add caffeine if you don't really, you know what I'm saying? No. Okay.
No.
Great.
Straight. Easy answer is no. I haven't come across anything that has been definitive to me in terms of a benefit from caffeine.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's probably a net neutral for most
Net
people.
neutral. Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah.
For obviously, it's biology. Everything's a bell curve. There's some people it's a net negative for sure, for sure. There's some people it could be a net positive. But I think on the whole, it's a net negative for most people, maybe even leaning towards a net negative. Or did I say net negative? I think on a whole, it's just a zero.
Yeah,
it's
neutral.
It's neutral for most people, maybe even leaning towards the negative, because caffeine is the hooded evasive person in our society, because
it's a drug. Yeah.
people do not realize how addictive caffeine is.
Yeah.
People do not
kind of scares me.
People do not realize that there is a sizable portion of the population that if they stopped their caffeine tomorrow would have a headache so debilitating they could not work. And you know how I know this? Because I'm one of these people. And I hate it. I mean, I don't even have that much. Like I said, 100, 150 milligrams a day. And still, if I didn't have it, I would be going through actual withdrawal. Nobody talks about it.
Yeah.
Nobody talks about it.
Yeah.
The fact that it's so mainstream that, what is it, 90% of Americans have caffeine daily. It's something super high.
Yeah.
So mainstream that most people are physically addicted to something.
Right.
It, like you said, it's just like older generations with cigarettes.
Yeah.
I don't know. The only thing that I've thought about quitting, I kind of want to quit, but at the end of the day, like I said, it's probably just a net neutral. Probably just a net neutral. So I'm not all that worried about it.
No, for sure. Yeah, I think there's probably like a lot of things. I mean, it's not gonna kill you. I mean, it's just like, you know, unless you take it to an extreme, that becomes a problem. It's unfortunate that it is one of those things where it's so mainstream, yet it's like just like you couldn't even get off of it if you wanted to, even with such a small dose. But I'm happy that you did answer that question as a net neutral and didn't tell me to add caffeine in my diet. Because honestly, one of the other reasons, I have no idea why I never started drinking coffee. I don't know why. But one of the things that, I don't know if you share this, but like as a, as a thinker, as somebody who wants to always improve myself, improve myself in all sorts of different facets of life, whether it's nutrition or whether it's just like physical being, I try to be as minimal as possible, right? So I try to be a minimalist in everything that I do, like my room. Like I try to have like only functional things, as far as belongings and stuff like that. I kind of think of that from a different perspective, whether it's financially, try to just kind of keep it relatively condensed. And I'm relating it back to like nutrition, right? If I didn't need to have another thing every day that I needed to take, right, then that's a good thing to me, because it's like, okay, I'm doing fine right now. I don't need to add anything. Like I don't need to add the caffeine or stuff like that. So that's good. But I don't know. I don't know if that's something that you're kind of like into as well. I think it just, it keeps my head grounded more. Cause I feel like if there's more shit that I have to worry about, even if it's like stuff in my room or stuff that's out of place, I don't know if I have like some sort of level of OCD, but you know what I mean? Like it just in general, like I feel like if your world, whether it's physically or mentally, is more crowded, I don't think it helps.
No, total truth to that. For me, it's like you just said, it's a lot of things. It's like, it's caffeine, it's what I'm eating, it's what's going on in my life, it's, whatever else I'm putting in my body, alcohol, whatever it is, like, just always seeking that minimalist baseline of like, this is who I actually am. Like, this is me without any exogenous external stimuli messing me up.
Right.
Like I got to find my baseline of who I am. This is me without any junk in me. This is me with a full night of sleep and the right nutrition and the right mindset, without any stress or without a hangover. Like, this is who I actually am, and this is my baseline. Knowing that baseline is very important. And for me, like I talked about earlier, a large part of my journey was finding that baseline. I was not optimally healthy before I started messing around with my nutrition. I was not optimally healthy before I started dialing in my exercise. And I really feel like through 2018, 2019, 2020, I have found what my baseline is, where my baseline of this is who I am, this is how I should feel. And it makes me more comfortable with slight deviations here or there because I know where I actually am, where I'm supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Absolutely.
and
Absolutely.
I'm starting to run out of gas. I am.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so maybe we should end on that and
Yeah.
tell everyone to find their baseline and
Yeah.
find what pushes them in life and what makes them fueled by progress.
Fuck
you
yeah,
know?
man.
Shout
Absolutely.
out to the podcast.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. For sure. I feel you. I feel you there. I don't know. We just checked the time. I think it's been like 3.5 hours
It's
or
been
something.
like all night.
It's been all night, but it's been a great.
Felt like about 15 minutes,
Yeah.
and now here we are. The sun might be coming up.
Yeah, definitely. But no, it's been a great conversation, man. Thank you so much for coming by. I want to hit you with these last final 3 questions that we ask everybody that comes on the show. Okay, so the first one is, throughout your life, you know, in every aspect of it, you've probably had some people directly, like people in your life, indirectly, people online or, social media or the YouTube or whatever, or like groups of people that have had an impact on you and have molded you into the person you are. It's a loaded question, but what are the top 3 for you? Like your top 3 biggest influences throughout your life? I think that I know when I kind of thought of this question, it was like, that's really going to tell the viewers in just one question, like the type of person you are, the type of, like where you kind of got a lot of your influence from. So if you can narrow it down.
That's great, man. That's great. That's tough.
It's a tough one.
I've had a lot,
Yeah.
a lot, but I got to start with the obvious one. I'll start with each phase of my life. I'll go when I was a kid, when I was like an adolescent, and as a young man. So when I was a kid, definitely my father.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably true through all phases of my life. Extremely, extremely respectable, full of good morals, a strong man, and just like I said, very respectable.
Mm-hmm.
Very respectable.
Mm-hmm.
Just a stand-up guy that set like the ultimate example of like the framework of how to just be like a moral, respectable man in society.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously had a big impact on me.
Yep.
Not claiming that I'm that man yet, but what I meant by that is just I'm talking about it. So obviously it had an impact. I think through my adolescence, that's a tough one.
Mm-hmm.
That's a tough one. Somebody that, so the question was somebody that impacted me, somebody that inspired me, somebody I look up to. Yep. I think I would have to say for the second one, it was not any person in particular. It was the guys that were 5 or 10 years ahead of me.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't one. It was, if I was 13, it was the guy that was 18 and was going to an awesome college. Or if I was 16, it was the guy that was 22 and that was, like killing it, starting his own business, stuff like that. And then as I got older into my 20s, into my mid-20s here, it's even tougher because I like to think that I'm trying to carve out a path that's not necessarily like the most common. So there's not really a whole lot of examples for me to look up to.
Mm-hmm.
But it really comes down to my circle of information, my circle of like entertainment in terms of like the people I connect with, the podcasts I listen to, the people I have meetings with, being like a young entrepreneur in biotech, I'm fortunate enough to be able to set up meetings with a lot of people that are CEOs, owners a few years ahead of me. And it's really to them now that I look for influence. I look for to advice, people that are doing really cool things in the field. And at the same time, it's podcasts, man. Like I mentioned, I love podcasts. It's Peter Attia doing the amazing things he's doing with taking the medical platform to the 21st century. Even somebody like Joe Rogan, who just brings on guests that have had influence on me. He himself has had an influence on me. And also some of my friends, like Jimmy, who you had on. Those are really important for me, really impactful for me. I know this is a bad answer because it's not very exact, but the truth is it's not exact, dude. I have, like you mentioned, I think it was off camera or off mic, you mentioned about how with podcasting, you like to take a little bit from everyone that's doing something great and you just take pieces from them. That's exactly how I am with the influence in my life. That's exactly how I am with people I look up to, is that I like to look everyone and anything and just learn from them what I can. It goes back to what I mentioned very early in the podcast, just about being a very open person, being very high in openness, the personality trait, and just always seeking new ways of looking at things, new ideas, new people. I've always been like that, and it translates to my view of this question.
Yeah. Well, I can definitely empathize with the answer, because I've asked this question to everyone, and honestly, I don't think I could answer it myself, like narrowing it down to 3. So I hear exactly what you're saying. There's been a lot of impact on me, and I know I just like the answer as well. Yeah. I think that, again, like you said, I think that's the way to go. Just try to take pieces of everyone and then just kind of mold it into something that you like. So definitely feel you there. Second one is, somebody comes up to you, and it could be about anything, however you really want to take it, but just all of the things that you do, like, what is the best life advice that you give to somebody so far? It might change. Obviously, it might have changed already throughout your life. It might change by the time you're a father, grandfather, like all these different, phases of our life. But right now, best advice that you give to somebody.
Well, this is definitely, like you mentioned, this is definitely going to evolve as I get older. I'm a young man, so this is going to change. But as I talked about earlier, I had a really unique experience. Not really unique, but I had a hard experience when I was 20, 21. Very hard experience with that anxiety that I battled with. It's a very difficult part in my life. Very difficult.
Yeah.
And like most guys at that age, I never in a million years thought that that would be me. Out of that, I came into a life where I was constantly challenging myself, constantly trying to do hard things, understanding the power of working to overcome something, whether it's a goal or whether it's a pain, working to overcome things. I think that the piece of advice I can give that summarizes a lot of how I live my life and a lot of what has been so powerful for me in life to this point is, if it's not hard, it might not be worth doing. If it is hard, it's probably worth doing.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, if it is hard, it's probably worth doing. That's what I would say. And, you know, I feel like I can take pride in trying some hard things in my life, but I have to work to even try harder. I have to work to try harder things. I always feel a little disappointed in myself every day, because I know I could have pushed myself a little bit more. And because I feel that way, I've been able to do a lot that I'm pretty happy with. I still got a lot of ways to go. You know, there's still a lot I want to accomplish in life, as I've talked about some of that. But I think that going through a really, really difficult experience when you're young is really important in some ways. And if you don't have that, you should force it upon yourself by challenging yourself. You should force it upon yourself. I had it forced upon me in a really bad way, in terms of just like going from a normal guy to like having panic attacks all the time and really bad anxiety. This was 4 years ago. Out of nowhere, really. Out of nowhere. It showed up in the course of a few months, and it changed my life. It was really, really hard to deal with. Really freaking hard. Like I had to take a semester off of school in undergrad. It was hard. But I faced that. I faced that head on, and I overcame it. I overcame it through mental practice. I overcame it through seeking help where I needed help. I overcame it through studying nutrition and understanding how that was affecting me, through committing myself to exercise, through committing myself to long-term goals that I believed in. You know, part of the reason I think I had a lot of that anxiety is because I didn't have long-term goals that I believed in. I didn't have things that I felt were challenging me enough, things that I felt I should be doing. And being faced with that situation that was so hard, it defined my entire 20s up to this point in many ways. It defined who I am today. Because now I know that I'm somebody that can face a very hard situation and I can battle it. And odds are I feel pretty confident I can come out on top. And you never get that feeling if you don't try something hard. If you're not faced with something hard and you don't rise to the occasion. So I'd say, if it's hard, it's probably worth doing. And if it's hard and you didn't pick it, you should probably rise to the occasion.
Yeah. That's great advice, man. I totally agree. And like you said, I mean, everybody has their own story, and that's why, that's why we do this show, because we like to bring people on, and I appreciate you for sharing all that. And, yeah, I totally agree. If it's not, if it's hard, it's probably worth doing. And if it is hard and you go through it, it's going to definitely make you stronger. So
Yeah.
there it is.
Yeah.
Okay. Last one is actually a kind of a layup, easy question. We've talked about a few things. We got a couple links down in the description already, on that MythBusters clip, on the talk that you gave, just, any sort of other stuff. What I like to do, and I think I told you about this before we went live, is I'm very appreciative of anybody that comes into the studio here and sits across from me, and I want to make sure that anything that I can do to, and this show can do, the platform, any of the viewers, that if they've watched this and they're excited about, the things that you're doing and the innovations and just anything about your story, I want to always give the opportunity for you to promote anything you have going on, and just kind of roll out the red carpet here. So if you have anything, if it's about you, if it's about somebody else, if it's about like the lab or anything like that, anything you want to promote, just if you want to give it a shout out, I will have links to everything in the description.
I should have prepared.
Should have brought a list.
Well, in a couple months, you guys will all be able to see a lot more information about the company that is starting out of my research. So I guess I'll kind of promote that in advance. Other than that, I don't have any social media.
We should have talked about that next time. I was thinking about that, but yeah.
Next time we'll talk about that, but I am MIA when it comes to social media. You won't be able to find me, but you can find me on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I'll put the LinkedIn link in the description there.
Yeah, please, if you're interested in anything, I'd be happy to talk about my research, talk about business and biotech, anything we talked about, anything you're interested in, nutritional biochemistry. If you want some pointers on how to build muscle or lose weight or improve your health, guys, everything I talked about today, I'm really happy to just talk about. So find me on LinkedIn, just shoot me a message. I'd be happy to respond about anything. So Sweet. Other than the company, which I can't really promote yet.
Soon.
We're working on our IP. Other than that, I don't think I got anything.
It's all good, man. I mean, it's a process, progress, and you continue to build. So I mean, you're in the early phases of something great. So we're definitely gonna. I'm excited to continue to watch your journey.
As are you.
Yeah. So I mean,
when this gets huge, I'll be happy to be one of the early ones.
He was an early guest.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, this has been terrific. Very thankful again. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah,
it was great. I enjoyed it.
We'll definitely do it again. This has been a great 3.5 hours. Great talk. Could talk to you all night, but it's freezing in here, and I know we gotta wrap.
Yeah, so listeners, if you made it this far.
But thanks again, man. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Mark. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, this has been another episode of Fueled by Progress with my guest, Alex Connor. We thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you in the next one.